Hey guys, tonight we begin with something cold, crude, and catastrophically unforgiving. Life in 7000 BC, not as a chieftain, not as a shaman, not as some wise, bearded hunter with a necklace of teeth. No, tonight, you're not anyone special. You're just you, dropped unprepared into a world of cracked stone pillows, freezing wind, and fire that absolutely refuses to be tamed. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of thing. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or some wind noise for that prehistoric ambience. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to pain. Not a dramatic, heroic pain, just the dull, universal ache of having spent the entire night sleeping on rocks. Your hip is bruised. Your spine feels like it was twisted by a curious bear. Your face is crusted with dried saliva, moss, and what might be last night's dinner trying to leave you the hard way. There is no mattress. There is no bed. There is barely ground in the modern sense. You slept in a shallow patch of cold dirt, maybe half sheltered by a boulder and some grass that refuses to cooperate. Your body is curled like a dying animal, your arms tucked into something vaguely resembling clothing, a strip of hide, now damp and curling at the edges. The wind cuts through it like bone through rotting fruit. You're freezing. The fire you lit, or rather, failed to keep alive, is now nothing but a ring of blackened ash and judgmental embers. You were supposed to keep it going. That was your job. Now it's out. And so as you're standing in the group, assuming you had any to begin with, you check for your knife. The flint blade you chipped for hours using another rock and several nervous breakdowns. It's gone. Either you dropped it in the dark last night, or someone else in your tribe took it. Because that's the thing about 7000 BC. Everything is personal and nothing belongs to you for long. You're not safe. Not from hunger. Not from the cold. And certainly not from them. The people nearby who barely tolerate your presence and speak to you in a language made of throat noises and vague pointing. You try to rise. Your knees say no. Your back says never again. Your fingers are swollen from the cold and possibly infected from that time you try to clean a fish with your bare hands. Your breath is visible in the morning air, which smells like dirt, dung, and disappointment. You look around. No houses, no roads, no fences, just a flat, gray dawn pressing down on a world made of wet bark, sharp stones, and things that would really prefer if you were dead. There's no breakfast waiting for you. No morning coffee. No alarm clock. Just the shriek of some animal being eaten in the distance, or doing the eating, and the realization that if you don't find food soon, you'll be next. You've been awake for 2 minutes, and already your top priorities are: warm up, don't die, maybe find your knife. You will likely fail at all three. Welcome to 7000 BC, and welcome to your worst day on Earth. Clothing is a modern privilege. Zippers? Elastic? Moisture-wicking performance fabric? Please. In 7000 BC, your entire wardrobe is a glorified question mark stitched together with sinew and desperate optimism. You don't own clothes. You survive with coverings. And right now, you don't even have that. You wake up to find your only possession, a scrap of hide vaguely shaped like a loincloth, missing. Maybe you kicked it off in the night during a dream about mammoths. Maybe the wind took it. Maybe someone else took it and is now using it as a nose rag. You look around. No sign of it. No one seems to care. This is not a society built on modesty. Everyone is either half naked or covered in patchwork furs so crusted with dirt and grease they've developed their own topography. But still, you are cold, exposed, and one gust of wind away from inventing ancient embarrassment. The air is brutal. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it negotiates directly with your bone marrow. Every part of your body feels like it's being insulted by winter. You try to fashion something from a nearby pile of woven reeds. You fail. They fall apart immediately, and now your hands are full of tiny cuts. You glance across the clearing at others in your group. One woman is wrapped in what might once have been a wolf. The man next to her wears a belt of twisted vines, and what you really hope is not human scalp. The tribal elder is covered in layers of animal skins, feathers, and prestige. He sneezes directly onto the ground and continues grunting instructions about something. You pretend to understand. You wrap a strip of damp bark around your waist. It sticks, briefly, then falls off when you move. It's less a garment and more a poetic metaphor for your life. There's no fire left to warm yourself. You stomp your feet, rub your arms. Your body shivers so hard you think you might evolve a new organ just to protest. This is the Neolithic fashion crisis. You have no thread, no loom, no tailoring. What you do have is hair. Yours, and hopefully some left on that lump of fur someone dropped in the mud last night. You crawl over to it. It smells like regret, but it's warm regret. So you wrap it around yourself like a defeated burrito. You're now dressed. Technically, there's a distant rustling in the bushes. Probably an animal, possibly a predator. You reach for a weapon and remember, you don't have one. You are standing in a field, wrapped in fur you didn't earn, barefoot, hungry, and wishing you had gone to sleep in the 21st century instead. One child points at you and laughs, or maybe cries. Hard to tell. The facial expressions in 7000 BC are a blend of fear, confusion, and open-mouth breathing. You shuffle away in shame, the mud squishing between your toes, your dignity trailing behind you like yesterday's mammoth bones. You miss your loincloth. You didn't realize how important it was until it was gone. But that's 7000 BC for you. You don't appreciate what you have until a goat eats it in the night. In the harsh, rust-colored dawn of 7000 BC, there is no such thing as personal belongings. There is only what you're holding and what someone else wants more than you do. And yesterday, the only thing you had worth stealing, your flint knife, vanished. You love that knife. You carve it yourself. Well, sort of. Mostly you banged rocks together until one of them broke into a vaguely threatening shape. And then you declared victory. It wasn't pretty or symmetrical, but it was yours. And now it's gone. You check the ground where you slept. Nothing. You check your pitiful bundle of belongings, a cracked bowl, a stick, and half a snail. Still nothing. You ask the nearest member of your group, a man with a prominent brow ridge and no concept of personal space. He grunts. You grunt. He points to his belt. There it is. Your knife, tucked into his hide pouch like it's always been there. You point at it. He raises his eyebrows like you just accused him of witchcraft. There's no court, no judge, no lost and found. There's just social hierarchy, and you're not on top of it. You can challenge him, but he's taller, stronger, and currently gnawing on a femur like it owes him money. So you do the logical thing. You back away slowly and pretend you made a stretch. Now you are unarmed in a world that is almost entirely made of sharp things and things that need to be stabbed. You consider making a new knife. That involves finding good flint, finding a hammerstone, sitting alone for hours, cutting your hands open, again, and ending up with a new tool that some other jerk will probably steal by sunset. You find a rock. It looks promising. You try to nap it. It explodes into dust and shards, one of which flies into your eye. Excellent. Now you're blind in one eye, weaponless, and your hand is bleeding again. Your ancestors are probably laughing from the afterlife. You spot an old woman sharpening something by a fire. She has 3 knives. 3. You approach. She doesn't look up. You nod respectfully. She growls. You back away. Knives aren't just tools. They're status. They're protection. They're the difference between skinning a rabbit and dying cold and hungry in a ditch while the rabbit watches. Without a blade, you can't hunt. You can't carve. You can't trade. You can't even eat without sucking marrow out of bones like a sad hyena impersonator. You look down at your empty hands. They tremble, not just from cold this time, from dread. Because in 7000 BC, a person without a knife is just future jerky, and you're already halfway dried. Let's talk about breakfast. In the 21st century, breakfast is a sacred ritual of toast, oat milk, and existential dread over email. In 7000 BC, breakfast is an active combat situation between you, nature, and your stomach trying to digest itself from the inside out. You are hungry, but not the kind of hungry that says, maybe I'll wait till brunch. No, you are prehistorically hungry. Your ribs are countable. Your stomach growls like a cave bear with abandonment issues. You'd eat bark. You've eaten bark. It was a mistake, but you're considering it again. There is no kitchen. There is no grain. There is no food pyramid. There is only the hope that something edible is still within walking distance, didn't get eaten by wolves, and doesn't have fangs. You stumble through the underbrush, eyes darting, nose twitching, hands prepared to grab literally anything that looks vaguely chewable. The good news, you spot a berry bush. The bad news, you remember this exact bush gave you hallucinations and diarrhea last week. The worst news, you're still considering it. You pass some mushrooms. You sniff. You poke. You try to remember which ones are food and which ones are slow, purple death. Unfortunately, prehistoric botany education was limited to try it and see. You skip the mushrooms. For now. Then you spot it. A lizard. Small, fast, and radiating indifference. You lunge. You miss. You fall face first into a thorn bush. Your tongue tastes blood and humility. The lizard saunters off like it owns the forest. You consider eating the thorn bush. You move on. There is movement in the trees. A bird. Glorious, fat, feathered breakfast. You hurl a rock. It ricochets off a tree and hits your own foot. You scream in pain. The bird screams in triumph and flies away. You're now limping and still starving. Eventually, salvation appears in the form of grubs. Fat, squirming, protein-packed maggots of the dirt gods. You pop one in your mouth. It pops back. The taste is somewhere between spoiled almonds and regret. But it's food. Kind of. You eat 3 more. Your stomach stops growling and starts plotting revenge. Someone nearby is chewing on something unidentifiable and not offering to share. You don't ask. Sharing in 7000 BC is theoretical and usually enforced with blunt objects. You suck the marrow out of a tiny, cracked bone you found near a fire pit and pretend it's soup. It's not. A child walks by eating a cooked frog leg. Where do they get it? Unknown. Could you ask for a bite? Not unless you want to be chased by their mother and possibly bitten. You try to smile at the child. The child throws a rock at you. It's fair. You end up eating half a root, 2 grubs, and a single burnt snail. You are not full. You're not satisfied. But you're no longer actively dying, and in 7000 BC, that counts as a gourmet experience. You sit by the cold ashes of the fire, licking grease off your fingers that might not even be yours, and reflect on the meal. You have consumed approximately 77 calories. Your body needs at least 2,000. You're deeply in debt, metabolically speaking. You stare at the trees, wondering if lunch will be any better. It won't. In modern times, if your neighbors are loud or weird, you call the authorities. In 7000 BC, there are no authorities. Just other humans who speak a different set of grunts, smell like smoke and blood, and collect heads like they're trading cards. You do not like the neighboring tribe. You're not supposed to. They live half a valley away. beyond the ridge where the dead trees grow and the birds don't sing. That alone should be a red flag. But no, you keep running into them. Mostly because food is scarce, and everyone keeps accidentally wandering into each other's hunting zones with a very innocent face and a very sharp stick. They are taller than you remember. Their hair is tied in elaborate clumps. Their leader has painted their face with red ochre and the blood of something that looked too smart to be eaten. You've never made eye contact with them for more than a second because the last guy who did is now missing, and his skull is very likely hanging from the tribe's ceremonial tree. You've seen it. Everyone has. It's not hidden. It's displayed. Their skull collection is impressive, honestly. Skulls of enemies. Skulls of animals. One that might be a weird goat, or a child, or both. Each one is polished, decorated, turned into a mask, or a bowl, or a warning. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to be remembered like that. A jawbone, some teeth, and a painted message that says, "Don't come back." This morning, your group sends you to scout the ridge. Why you? Because you're quiet. Because you're expendable. Because you lost your knife. Because no one else said no fast enough. You climb slowly through the woods, stepping carefully over dry leaves and snapping twigs. Each sound feels like an announcement. You are prey. You are soft. You are wearing a questionable tunic made of woven grass. You do not look intimidating. Then you see them, 3 members of the rival tribe, standing near a fire, sharpening spears. One is humming. One is scraping a bone. One is watching you because you are terrible at hiding. You freeze, smile, grunt nervously. You raise a hand in greeting, a gesture that might mean hello, or I'm unarmed, or please don't eat me. They grunt back. One of them gestures toward the pile of bones beside their feet. There's a skull in that pile. You count 5 teeth still in place. Human, adult, probably recent. You nod slowly. Back away. You trip over a root and fall. They laugh. Laughter is bad. Laughter means you are entertainment. Laughter means you're not a threat, which is only good if they're full or lazy or planning something worse later. You return to your group and explain, mostly with hand motions, that the neighboring tribe is alive, well, and in possession of a lot of bones that don't belong to them. Your group nods solemnly. One man picks up a sharpened stick. Another begins painting his face. Someone starts carving an idol. You sit quietly, gnawing on a root, thinking about your teeth. How white they are. How perfect they'd look in someone else's bowl. In the 21st century, you've been spoiled. Even the worst public restroom, the ones with broken locks, fluorescent lighting, and inexplicable puddles, is still a technological miracle compared to what you're dealing with here in 7000 BC, where the very concept of private sanitation hasn't so much not been invented as never even been imagined. You feel the urge. Nature calls. But out here, nature is the only thing that answers back, and usually with teeth. There is no latrine. There is no corner, no bush reserved for the sacred act of human vulnerability. Everyone just sort of does their business wherever feels least immediately dangerous. The only real rule is don't go where the fire pit is. The second rule is don't go where someone already went yesterday. These 2 rules are broken constantly, sometimes simultaneously, especially by children. You shuffle awkwardly to the edge of the clearing, trying to look casual, like you're just going to check on a rock or commune with a tree spirit. But everyone knows. Everyone always knows. Bodily shame doesn't exist here because it hasn't evolved yet, but judgment absolutely has, and it burns like the roots you ate for breakfast. You squat. The wind finds you instantly. Cold air wraps around parts of your body you don't even like to think about in polite company. There is no toilet paper, no leaves, not unless you like rashes in places where rashes should not exist. No smooth stones, unless you're lucky and luck ran out for you 3 days ago when you sat on a wasp nest. What you do have is a stick, a dull, crumbly stick that offers all the comfort of an accusation. You use it. You regret it. You wish for death. You finish, and now comes the worst part, disposal. You can't bury it. The ground is frozen or packed or full of worms you're supposed to save for eating later. So you do what everyone does. Walk away quickly and pretend nothing happened. But the smell follows. Oh, the smell. You rejoin the group and instantly sense that the others know. Not because they say anything, most of them are barely verbal, but because they inch away from you like you're the ghost of a diseased mammoth. You try to act natural, but your foot is wet from stepping in something you shouldn't have. Your hand has a suspicious smear on it. You wipe it on your fur. Your fur now smells worse than before. You sit on a rock and hope it absorbs your shame. And let's not even get into nighttime. When the temperature drops and the hyenas come out and your body, traitorous to the end, decides now is a good time for bowel distress. You run into the dark with a torch that won't light, hoping you don't trip, hoping you don't freeze, hoping the stars above are too busy watching someone else's suffering. Hygiene is a concept that exists only in the dreams of the unborn. Here, in 7000 BC, waste is everywhere. It seeps into the soil, runs into the stream, dries into dust, and blows into your eyes. And guess what? You still have to eat. With your hands. That touched the stick. That touched you. There is no soap. There is no water basin. If you're lucky, there's a puddle. If you're really lucky, the puddle doesn't blink back. So yes, there is no bathroom. But there is still urgency. There is still digestion. There is still the quiet horror of knowing that when your body demands release, your only option is to give in and hope the rest of the day doesn't collapse around the consequences. And tomorrow, you get to do it all again. There are no luxuries in 7000 BC. No heat, no safety net, no backup plan. But there is one thing, one singular miracle upon which every heartbeat, breath, and fragile spark of human survival depends. Fire. If you have it, you might live. If you don't, you won't. It's that simple. Fire is not just warmth. It is food, light, protection, social status, spiritual meaning, and the only thing standing between you and an eternity of slow, cold decomposition. And tonight, you don't have any. You had a fire. Once. Back when the others still trusted you with responsibility and your flintstones weren't mysteriously misplaced or stolen or possibly swallowed by a goat. You were in charge of keeping the coals alive through the night. Just a little pile of red embers under a layer of ash. Feed it. Guard it. Whisper to it if necessary. But don't let it die. You let it die. It wasn't your fault, really. The wind shifted. You fell asleep. The wood was damp. A bear sneezed in the distance. There are 1,000 excuses, and none of them matter now, because you are staring a ring of cold ashes while the rest of the group huddles in a pile of angry, shivering judgment. You try to relight it. You grab 2 stones, not flint, but something you think might be close enough. They aren't. You scrape them together until your fingers bleed, until your knuckles crack, until the stones themselves give up on you and crumble. No spark, not even smoke, just the sound of failure echoing into the trees. Someone behind you coughs. Someone else mutters a sound that probably means useless. The elder throws you a look that could curdle milk. One woman picks up a smoldering branch from her own fire and walks away before you can ask for help. Fire is communal, but only when it works. When it fails, it's your personal disgrace, and everyone feels colder just being near you. You try friction. You grab a stick, jam it into a piece of bark, and spin like your life depends on it, which it does. Your arms ache. Your shoulders scream. Your palms blister. Smoke appears. Hope rises. Then the bark splits, and your stick breaks in half, and your soul leaks out through your teeth. The sun is dropping. The air is sharpening. Your breath fogs into the sky like a slow death prayer. You know what's coming. Night without fire is a long conversation with hypothermia. The wind will steal heat from your skin like a tax collector. Your fingers will stiffen, your jaw will lock, and you will lie there beside the others, a human icicle in a bed of straw and regret. You ice someone else's fire. Just a few embers. They're not watching. You crawl closer. Reach for a coal with a stick. The child tending the fire sees you. They hiss like a cornered lizard. You freeze. They shout. A rock hits your shoulder. You retreat, humiliated, back to your dead fire pit. You try blowing on the ashes one more time. Just in case. Just for pride. Nothing. Not even warmth. You press your hands into the dirt and whisper a very ancient, very modern word. You curl up beside your useless stones, pull your filthy cloak around you, and prepare to shiver your way through the longest night of your life. Because in 7000 BC, fire isn't a convenience. It's the only god that answers. And tonight, it's not answering you. You might think sleep is rest, a time to heal, a soft surrender to the rhythm of the world. That's adorable. In 7000 BC, sleep is an act of desperation, not comfort, not recovery, just pausing the suffering until morning, if morning comes. You don't go to bed. You collapse into whatever patch of earth isn't already full of parasites, dung, or someone else's death. There are no mattresses, no hay, no blankets, unless you count your hide cloak, which now smells like smoke, blood, and the disappointing stew you spilled on it 2 days ago. You lie down, not because you're tired, though you are, but because your legs stopped listening to your brain and your brain is too cold to argue. The ground is hard, not like cheap motel mattress hard, like prehistoric glacial stone hard. Every bone in your body feels it. Your hip digs into the dirt. Your spine bends around a rock. There's something sharp under your ribs, and you hope it's a twig and not a femur from the last idiot who froze here. Your companions, the lucky ones, are already in a heap, sleeping in a tangled pile of limbs and breath, like a family of wolves if wolves occasionally snored, farted, and muttered in their sleep about fish. You inch closer to them. You try to find an opening in the pile. There isn't one. Every warm body is accounted for. Every inch of shared heat already claimed. You reach out a foot. Someone kicks it. You try again. You get an elbow to the ribs. You consider crying, but your tears freeze before they fall. You curl up alone. Cold eats through your skin like it has teeth. Your breath fogs in front of your face, hangs there like a warning. You pull your knees into your chest and your cloak over your head. It helps. A little. Then the wind shifts and it helps less. The earth is stealing your warmth. Slowly, methodically, like a thief who has done this before. Sleep comes, but not gently. It stalks you, waits until your guard is down. Then it floods in with hallucinations and shallow dreams. You think you're being eaten. You think someone is whispering your name. You think you hear your mother, even though she's been dead since the salmon died upstream. Your muscles twitch. Your feet cramp. Your nose runs, but freezes mid-drip. You wake up every few minutes to check that your fingers still exist. You curl your hands under your arms, but your arms are just as cold. You try to steal a bit of someone else's blanket. You succeed. Then you're hit with a stick. You get back. There's something scuttling nearby. You pretend it isn't real. Something howls in the trees. You pretend it isn't hungry. Your stomach growls. You pretend you aren't hungry. Sleep comes and goes like a cruel tide, pulling you under just long enough to make you forget the pain, then dumping you back into a body that still doesn't work. This is not rest. This is survival theater. A one-person performance piece titled Don't Die Until Dawn. You're not the lead. You're the background character who gets eaten in the second scene. And when you finally close your eyes for real, finally give in to the black, you dream of fire, and then of snow, and then of waking up in 7000 BC all over again. Because that's what tomorrow is. This again, but colder. At some point, the body gives up on dignity. It happens fast in 7000 BC. You begin the evening a proud, if lice-ridden hominid, clinging to the idea of personal space and self-respect. You end the night wrapped around the haunches of a wheezing, flatulent goat, whispering prayers into its fur and hoping it doesn't roll over and crush your lungs. Let's be clear, this isn't affection. It's strategy. In a world where the wind slices like obsidian and the ground holds the cold like a jealous ghost, you need warmth, and mammals are the best heating technology available. Not fire, not blankets. Goats. Living, steaming, farting blankets with hooves and attitude. The goat isn't yours. Nothing is yours. Ownership is for people with resources, and you don't even have shoes. This goat belongs to the group. Maybe. Or maybe it just wandered in one day and everyone was too tired to argue. Either way, it sleeps by the fire, which is more than you can say for yourself. You edge closer, inch by desperate inch, pretending to gather twigs, pretending to adjust your cloak. The goat watches you. Goats always watch. They don't blink. They don't trust. They choose side-eyed judgment and exude a kind of stubborn psychic pressure that makes you question every life choice that led to this moment. But still, you reach out. At first, you just make contact. One hand gently touches its side. It's warm, miraculously warm. You inch closer. The goat exhales through its nose. It smells like digested grass and ancestral sin. You press your body against it. The goat huffs. You stay. You're beyond shame. Soon, your arms are around it. One leg is tucked under its belly. Your cheek is mashed into its flank. You're holding a goat like a long-lost lover and murmuring nonsense syllables that mean, please don't move. The goat stares into the fire, emotionally uninvested. And then someone else joins. A child, then a second adult, then two more. The goat is now at the center of a sad, cold, prehistoric sandwich made entirely of humans and desperation. There are 6 of you, arranged like ruins around a holy relic. The goat makes a soft noise. No one breathes. You are all praying the same wordless prayer. Please don't leave. Please don't stand up. Please don't kick me in the face. But goats are unpredictable. They are chaos incarnate. They tolerate affection until they don't. And then they express disapproval through sudden violence. This one shifts. You flinch. It lifts a leg. Your heart stops. Then it sneezes violently into your hair. The spray is warm. You tell yourself that's a blessing. Hours pass. The warmth is real. Your body begins to feel like a body again. Fingers regain sensation. Toes stop curling. You even stop shivering. Briefly, you feel safe. Loved even. Like the goat understands your pain and forgives your weakness. It farts. Loudly. Wetly. The warmth is now a curse. You try to adjust. The movement wakes someone else. They grunt. You grunt. The goat bleats in irritation. The pile shifts. Someone elbows your spine. Someone else kicks your shin. Your face ends up under the goat's tail. You contemplate death, but you stay. Because this is warmth, and warmth is life. You swallow your pride, your disgust, and possibly a strand of goat hair, and drift into the kind of shallow, uneven sleep that only comes from exhaustion, mild hypothermia, and the occasional hoof to the ribs. In the morning, the goat will leave. It always does. It will step over your face, poop next to your head, and wander off like nothing ever happened. You will sit up, sore, bruised, and questioning the meaning of intimacy. But you'll be alive, thanks to your new best friend, who smells like feet, and saved your life, without ever knowing your name. Dressing yourself in 7000 BC isn't about expression. It's not a vibe. There is no aesthetic. There are no Pinterest boards for Neolithic looks. Your only goal is to not perish from exposure, humiliation, or both, and your available resources include the hide of something recently deceased, some fibers that itch like betrayal, and a dull bone needle that bends when you look at it wrong. Clothing in your world is an act of negotiation between your body and the elements, between your ego and your reality, between the goat you tried to sleep with last night and the goat you just realized is now your cloak. Let's start from the bottom. Shoes? No. What you have are foot wrappings, which is a generous term for strips of crusted leather tied around your feet with string made from plant guts and the haunted screams of your ancestors. They offer all the support of damp paper and about as much insulation. Every step is a gamble. Will you walk on thorns? Will the sole split in the mud? Will that hole get bigger and eat your toe? Surprise. All of the above. Now pants. You don't have any. Pants are future luxury. What you do have is something between a skirt and a shroud, made of woven reeds, wool, or flayed rabbit fur if you're lucky. It ties around your waist with a cord so fragile, a single cough can unravel your dignity. When you sit, it rides up. When you squat, it betrays you. It is too short in the winter, too heavy in the summer, and always slightly damp for reasons you no longer question. Your upper body is draped in something that began its life as an animal and ended as a rectangle with armholes. It has no buttons, no seams, just one overworked shoulder strap and a permanent crust of unknown provenance. The scent? A rich blend of smoke, sweat, lanolin, despair, and maybe a hint of fermented goat milk. You get used to it, mostly because your nose freezes first. You try to add layers, more fur, more wool, more anything. But the moment it rains, your whole outfit transforms into a sponge with sleeves. You now weigh 15 extra pounds and smell like a flooded cave. But it's better than dying. Probably. Color? Texture? Decoration? Not unless your spouse is feeling ambitious or someone in the clan just discovered berry juice. Once, someone painted a swirl on a tunic, and the village elders spent 3 days debating whether it was magic or a curse. Spoiler, it was both. No one has touched art since. Jewelry exists, sort of bone beads, teeth, maybe a shell if you live near the coast and are flush with fish. But it's not for beauty. It's for protection. Every necklace is a superstition. Every bracelet a prayer. You wear a crow's foot not because it matches your mammoth hide shawl, but because someone said it scared away fever spirits. You believe them. You have to. And there is no laundry day. There is just jump in the river and pray day. Or scrub with sand and freeze to death trying to dry it day. Most of the time, you wear your clothes until they fall off, disintegrate, or attract something with teeth. Then you thank them for their service and steal someone else's. Still, there's pride. Small, stubborn pride. You tuck your fur just right. You tie your cord with flair. You place that crow's foot where the gods can see it. You may be filthy, damp, and deeply unattractive, but you're still here, and the wind hasn't killed you yet. And that, in 7000 BC, is a fashion statement. It says, I have survived. It was awful. And yes, this used to be a goat. Let's get back to the fire. That flickering, moody, barely controllable deity you worship, fear, and occasionally burn yourself on. Because in 7000 BC, fire isn't just part of life. It is life and death, often both. The fire is crackling tonight. That sounds comforting, but here's the truth. You don't trust it. Nobody does. It's beautiful, yes. It dances. It warms. It cooks the meat you didn't catch and dries the clothes you can't afford to wash. But it also kills, without remorse and without warning. Fire is the only member of the tribe you have to feed constantly and still suspect might try to murder you in your sleep. Your relationship with fire is a nervous romance. You court it with dried moss, flint, and prayer. You whisper to it as you strike stone against stone, hoping for a spark. When the spark lands in the kindling, you blow gently. Too hard, and you smother it. Too soft, and it mocks you by fading away. Sometimes it catches. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it waits until you've turned your back and then erupts with all the subtlety of a lightning strike. Tonight, the fire is behaving. Kind of. It sits in the pit, flickering like an old story. You huddle near it, hands out, knees tucked, eyes locked on the coals like they might deliver a vision. Everyone else does the same. Fire is the center of everything, not just warmth and food, but presence. It's the village hearth, the tribe's anchor, the reason you're all still breathing and not buried beneath ice or bones. But fire demands attention. Constant, obsessive, undivided attention. You can't just set it and forget it. This isn't a stove. This is a wild, angry creature pretending to be domesticated. You feed it dry grass. It spits smoke in your face. You give bark. It sizzles with disdain. You add too much at once, and it flares up like a toddler having a tantrum. One wrong move, and your entire shelter goes up with it. And let's not forget, the only firewood you have left is still damp, stolen from a half-frozen log you found beside the stream and wrestled away from a fox. Your eyes burn. Your hands are cracked from heat and cold and the joyless rhythm of breaking sticks. You're not even warm. You're just less cold than you were. The smoke curls under the roof and gathers like a secret. You cough. Someone else coughs. The elder says that's the spirit of the fire cleaning your lungs. You're pretty sure it's just smoke inhalation, but who are you to argue with someone who still has all their fingers? And then there's cooking, or what passes for it. You don't have pots. You don't have pans. You have a flat rock, some glowing coals, and a vague sense that this root might not kill you if roasted long enough. You drop it in. The fire hisses. Everyone leans in. 10 minutes later, it's still hard. 20, and it's now ash. You eat it anyway, because hunger makes ash taste like hope. But the worst part isn't feeding the fire. It's guarding it. Because if it dies, you start over. And starting over in the dark, with numb hands and no flint, while wolves howl in the distance, is a special kind of despair. So someone always has to stay up. That someone is usually you. You take the night watch. Again, you sit beside the fire as the others sleep, wrapped in each other in damp wool. You add twigs. You blow gently. You watch the sparks leap up and vanish. You talk to the flames like they're listening. Maybe they are. Maybe not. But one thing is certain. If the fire dies, you all die. So you sit. You guard. You wait. And you try not to fall asleep. Because if you do, your next bed might be a pile of ash. You're getting used to the cold, the smoke, the hunger. That's not progress. That's surrender. And now it's time to talk about your home. Specifically the floor. Spoiler, it's not a floor. There's no part of your shelter that hates you more than the ground. In 7000 BC, you do not have a floor. You have earth. Raw, unapologetic, ancient earth that predates your bones and intends to outlast them. You sleep on it. You sit on it. You drop your food into it. It absorbs your sweat, your blood, your secrets, and sometimes, in the worst moments, your waste. The dirt is everything, and the dirt is never clean. It starts with mud, not ordinary rain-soaked playground mud. No, this is sentient, all-consuming, primordial ooze. In the summer, it's sticky and festering, crawling with insects, and humming with bacteria that your immune system only half understands. In the winter, it freezes into a stone sheet, so sharp it could slice your foot open just by looking at it wrong. There is no straw. There was once, but it rotted. There were furs, but they're on someone else now. You lay down your thin, damp wool and pretend it's cushioning. It isn't. You lie on your side, then your back, then your stomach, hoping to find an angle where you're not touching a rock, a cold patch, or something wriggling. You fail. When you wake up, if you sleep at all, you're colder than when you lay down. Your cloak is wet. Your knees ache. Your spine is shaped like a question mark. And you're itchy in places you didn't know had nerves. The dirt has entered you. Not metaphorically. Literally. It's in your hair, in your nose, in the back of your throat. You cough, and it tastes like last week's charcoal. You spit, and it lands in the same spot where you dropped your food earlier. You eat the food anyway. The children don't care. They dig in the dirt like it's a toy box, burying things, unburying others. Bones, fire starters, half a fish. They do it all barefoot, and somehow they're healthier than you. You used to try to stay clean, but that was 5 days ago before the Great Puddle incident. Now your legs are a different color, and your nails could be classified as weapons. Worse, the dirt is alive. Not metaphorically. Actually, tiny mites, fleas, larvae, things with legs and wings and antennae. You try to ignore them, but they bite. They wriggle. They nest. You once found something moving inside your sleeping mat. You burned it. The mat, not the thing. The thing ran away. You haven't slept well since. And then there's the hygiene problem. Going to the bathroom is a phrase that implies a destination. You go right here, or near here, or close enough that the smell becomes familiar. You dig shallow holes. Sometimes. Usually not. The rain washes it all back toward your fire pit anyway. You try to sit somewhere dry, but the dryness doesn't last. There's always a seep, always a squelch, always that moment of betrayal when your thigh finds a wet patch and you realize this isn't just water. Still, you endure. You wrap your cloak tighter. You find a smoother stone to sit on. You flick beetles off your chest like old acquaintances. You murmur curses at the worms and offer apologies to the ghost of the rat you accidentally rolled over in your sleep. Because this is home, the earth beneath you, the filth around you, the cradle of death, and the only thing that hasn't yet tried to eat you. You don't live on the dirt. You live in it. And if you're lucky, you'll stay alive long enough to one day rot back into it. It's the dead of night. The air could cut glass. And the only thing keeping your clan alive is a pile of glowing coals that absolutely want to go out the second you blink. Guess whose turn it is to keep it alive? There is no clock in 7000 BC, but your body knows it's 3 in the morning. It knows because it hurts. Deeply, profoundly. Like every bone has been filled with ice and every muscle replaced by wet rope. You're not awake by choice. You're awake because someone nudged you with a toe and muttered something that roughly translates to your turn. Fire duty. The words alone make you want to crawl back under the goat. But you can't, because the fire is dying. You know this the moment you sit up and feel nothing but cold. The glow is barely there, just a sad, pulsing breath of orange under a mound of ash. It's not a fire. It's a memory of a fire. And if you don't save it, the whole camp will wake up dead. You shuffle over. Every joint pops like it's made of tree bark. Your cloak is stiff. Your hands are already numb. You kneel beside the hearth, which is a generous term for a circle of cracked stones and sadness, and begin the ritual. First, poke it. You jab the coals with a stick and hope. Hope for red. Hope for heat. Hope for the smallest, most reluctant spark. You get smoke. Smoke that claws at your throat and reminds you that fire is not your friend. It's your debt collector. You feed a few twigs. Nothing. You try a handful of dried moss. It flares, then dies. You blow gently. You cough. You try again. The fire grumbles, then spits a little spark. Success? Not yet. You crawl to the wood pile. There's no real pile. Just a heap of vaguely drier than average sticks that someone dumped there 3 days ago and swore were good. You pick the least damp one and return like a sacrifice bearer. You place it gently. Whisper to it. Blow again. A flicker. A flame. It's back. Barely. And now you wait. You sit beside it, holding your hands near enough to feel heat, not close enough to set your sleeves on fire. You keep feeding it, one stick at a time. You must not let it die. This is your only job. And if you fail, everyone freezes. Behind you, the rest of the camp is a mass of human shapes under wool and furs, snoring, muttering, occasionally releasing sounds that would be illegal in later centuries. You're not one of them. You are awake. You are chosen. You are miserable. Time passes slowly, painfully. Your eyelids weigh 10 pounds each. Your thoughts get blurry. You dream with your eyes open. You imagine crawling into the fire just to feel something. You don't. You stay. Because this is the test. The sacred trial of the midwinter night. Every elder did it. Every survivor still bears the scars. You are now part of this grim relay, keeping the flame alive long enough to hand it off to the next miserable soul. And then it happens. You doze. 1 second, maybe 2. A flicker of unconsciousness. When you wake, the flame is gone again. You panic. Scrape, blow, beg. Your breath is visible in the cold. You offer your own body as tribute. You promise the gods anything. The coals answer. A spark returns. You've learned your lesson. Fire never sleeps. So neither do you. You've survived the cold, the dirt, the goat, and the night watch. Barely. Now comes the part you didn't realize you were doing wrong this whole time. Breathing. Because in 7000 BC, even the air is trying to kill you. Breathing. The most basic thing your body does. Inhale, exhale. Easy, right? Not here. Not now. Not in a mud-walled cave hut full of smoke, wool grease, mold, and at least 3 distinct types of animal gas. In 7000 BC, every breath is a gamble, and the house always wins. You wake up coughing. That's normal. Everyone does. The air inside your home, again, generous term, is dense. Not figuratively, literally. You can see it. A visible fog of wood smoke, breath steam, and ancient airborne sense clings to the ceiling like a ghost that's too tired to haunt. Your lungs feel tight, like they've been stuffed with damp moss. Your throat scratches. Your nose runs. You are, technically speaking, alive, but only barely. There is no chimney. Chimneys are future magic. The smoke from the fire rises and has nowhere to go, so it sits thick, oily, and malicious, swirling just above head level. If you're tall, you suffer more. If you're short, you suffer longer. No one escapes. You crawl under it during the night. You wake up in it. It's like living inside the breath of something that's been chewing burnt goat hair for 3 days straight. You try breathing through your nose. That works until it clogs. Then you try your mouth. But now your tongue is coated in ash and your lips taste like damp charcoal. Someone suggests tying a cloth over your face. You try it. It helps. Until the cloth becomes a frozen slab of wool snot. Then it doesn't. And let's not forget what's outside. You think, I'll just step out for some fresh air. Hilarious. The fresh air outside is mostly wind. Sharp, unrelenting, and cold enough to turn your teeth into ice sculptures. You take one breath, and it hits your lungs like a fist made of winter. You cough so hard your ribs spasm. You try again, slower this time. The air slices down your throat and makes you regret your choices. The elders say there's a breathing technique, something passed down by survivors of frost and smoke alike. It involves shallow inhales through the nose, followed by slower exhales through the mouth, all while squinting into the fire and muttering curses under your breath. You try it. You start to feel dizzy. You realize you're accidentally holding your breath. You pass out for a second. Someone nudges you and tells you to sit up before your soul leaks out. You adapt, because you must. You learn to breathe sideways, turning your head just slightly so the worst of the smoke curls past instead of directly into your sinuses. You crouch lower during the fire's peak heat and stand higher during the cooling hours. You wet the cloth before tying it over your face. Then curse when it freezes solid and you can't get it off. Progress. And there are moments, rare, miraculous moments, when the wind shifts and the hut breathes with you. The smoke thins. The air clears. Your lungs remember what oxygen feels like. You taste pine, or snow, or something that doesn't make you want to cough out your soul. These moments last 10, maybe 15 seconds. Then someone throws on a wet log, and the fire sputters back into hell's humidifier. Still you breathe. You must. Ragged, shallow, half-choked. Because if you don't, well, in 7000 BC, not breathing is the only thing easier than breathing. Let's get one thing straight. You are always hungry. Not missed breakfast hungry. Not forgot lunch hungry. This is the kind of hunger that chews your insides like a bear gnawing a bone. The kind of hunger that makes you hallucinate warmth and remember the smell of food that never existed. This is survival hunger. Prehistoric hunger. The hunger that speaks before you do. Breakfast doesn't exist. No one has invented the concept of meals. You eat when you can. You eat when something stops moving long enough to die. You eat when the older cousin of your cousin's cousin drags something back from the woods and throws it on the communal rock with the words, "Still warm." Let's say, by some miracle, there's food tonight. A rare event. A reason for grim smiles and the slow, ceremonial sharpening of flint blades. The main dish, something root-like, possibly a tuber, possibly the bottom half of an extinct vegetable. It's been buried under ash near the fire for a few hours. It's hot. It's soft. It tastes like burnt sadness and dirt. You don't care. You eat it with both hands. Next comes meat. If you're lucky, maybe it's rat, maybe squirrel, maybe something that died of natural causes and smells suspiciously like it already passed through a predator. You don't ask questions. You tear it with your teeth. Chew with the desperation of someone who knows this might be the last fat your body sees for a week. The bone crunches. You keep chewing. And fat, glorious, precious, body-saving fat is everything. In this world, fat is warmth. Fat is fuel. Fat is life itself. You scrape it from the bones. You suck it from marrow. You lick the grease off your fingers and don't apologize. Your brain is screaming for calories and your soul is answering. More. Sometimes there's a porridge, a slop of cracked grains, water, and wishful thinking. It's barely food, more of a textured liquid. It sticks to your ribs like glue. It also contains exactly 1/3 of a beetle and 2 crunchy bits you don't investigate. Still, it's warm, and that's enough. You eat in silence. Not because of manners, there are none, but because everyone is focused. The tribe eats like a pack. Quick, efficient, every bite counted, every portion measured. The elders get first pick. The children get the soft parts. You, low on the hierarchy and colder than a mammoth's nostril, get what's left. You don't complain. Complaining is for the strong. You are not strong. You are fed. That's the only victory that matters. And when the food is gone, scraped clean, bones cracked, bowls licked, you sit back. You press a palm to your stomach. For the first time in days, you are not in pain. You feel warmth spread from your core. Your limbs ache a little less. Your brain quiets. Your eyes close. It's not joy. It's not satisfaction. But it's something close. Something better. It's hope. Will you get food tomorrow? No idea. Is this enough to survive the night? Maybe. Do you regret eating that soft gray thing? Only slightly. But for now, in this one fragile moment, you are warm, full, and still breathing. And that, in 7000 BC, makes you the luckiest person alive. In the modern world, sleep is a luxury, a pleasure, a gentle descent into dreams with memory foam, ambient playlists, and the faint scent of lavender on your pillow. In 7000 BC, sleep is a tactical maneuver. a nightly battle between your desperate body and a climate that wants you very, very dead. And your only ally in this ancient war is a stone. Not just any stone. This stone has a name. Not because you're sentimental, but because you need to form emotional attachments to the only thing in your hut that consistently radiates warmth and hasn't bitten you. You've named it warmth. It's not clever. It is accurate. The process begins around dusk. Someone, probably you, drags a collection of fist-sized river rocks from the edge of the fire. They've been baking there since midday, slowly absorbing heat like prehistoric batteries. If you wait too long, they'll crack from the temperature. If you touch them too soon, you'll sear your fingerprints off and spend the rest of the week explaining your new hand tattoo. You wrap warmth in a strip of damp wool, muttering every sacred word you know. You don't want it too hot. You don't want it too cold. You want it barely survivable, like every other thing in your life. You cradle it like an infant or a very angry cat. You whisper to it. You carry it to your bedding, a pile of flattened straw that smells like goat feet and ancestral mistakes, and tuck it against your stomach like it's your last will and testament. And for about 16 seconds, it's bliss. A flood of primal comfort rushes through you. You almost remember what warmth felt like. You breathe easier. Your toes unclench. You feel not happy, but less near death. It's a miracle, a hot miracle. But warmth has a short temper, a shorter lifespan. After 10 minutes, the heat fades. After 20, it's lukewarm. By 30, you're holding a cold, resentful chunk of geology that now smells faintly of sheep and betrayal. You consider getting up to reheat it. You don't, because standing up would mean leaving the 5-degree temperature bubble you fought so hard to build. You press the stone tighter. Maybe your body heat can reignite it. It can't. You try anyway. Some people sleep with 2 rocks, some with 3. One particularly inventive elder once sewed small pebbles into a pouch and wore it like a vest. He hasn't been seen since the avalanche, but his legacy lives on. You, however, have 1 rock and 2 options. Sleep badly or don't sleep at all. And then there's the danger. Rocks explode. It's rare, but it happens. A waterlogged stone, heated too fast, can burst like a thunderclap and turn your bedtime into a shrapnel festival. You've seen it. You've lived it. You now flinch slightly every time warmth hisses or shifts in the dark. Still, it's worth it, because you're not freezing. Not entirely. Because this rock, this silent, heavy, slowly cooling relic, is all that stand between your organs and a frostbite-induced farewell. It's not love. It's not comfort. But it is thermal inertia, and that's as close to affection as nature allows. So you wrap yourself tighter. You whisper goodnight to warmth. You close your eyes, bracing for dreams you may not remember and a dawn you may not reach. And you think, this rock is warmer than my father ever was. This rock is all I have. This rock is the reason I might live till sunrise. There's only one rule at night. Get near the fire. Fire is the center, the hearth, the sun you pray to while everything else freezes and dies around it. You want to sleep close, very close, too close. But fire is also the only object in your life that can both save you and roast your kneecaps like chestnuts. And there's only so much room. You shuffle toward the pit after the others have claimed their positions. There's always a perfect radius, the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold. Already taken. One side of the fire is reserved for the elders. They claim spiritual authority and also have the most visible burn scars, which earns them respect. The other side is children, livestock, and whoever cried loudest before bedtime. You're somewhere between a human and a particularly dignified stump. So you wedge yourself into the outer edge, where the fire is just warm enough to keep your soul from leaving your body. You lie on your side, facing the flames, watching them like they might judge you. They do. They always do. You arrange your limbs into the most efficient insulation configuration. Knees up, elbows in, one hand over your vital organs, the other curled protectively over warmth, your ever-cooling stone companion. Your back is already cold. Your face is too hot. Your feet are numb, but your eyebrows are sweating. This is the ancient paradox. To be warm, you must risk burning. To be safe, you must risk freezing. There is no middle ground, just a tightrope of smoldering ash and human error. Occasionally, someone rolls too close. You hear it before you see it. The quiet hiss of wool catching an ember, the sudden shuffle of limbs, the frantic slap, slap, slap as someone extinguishes their own sleeve with a half-roasted turnip. No one screams. Screaming wastes heat. They just grunt, roll over, and hope the blister isn't too deep. This is normal. You stay awake longer than you should. Not out of anxiety, though that's there, but because the fire is hypnotic. It flickers. It breathes. It thinks. You imagine it speaking, not in words, but in crackles and pops. It says, I am your God now. You nod. You accept. You already sacrificed your eyebrows once. You'll do it again. Some brave soul shifts in their sleep and ends up snoring directly into the ash bed. No one moves to help. That's how we learn. A child kicks a flaming stick onto a sleeping goat. The goat doesn't move. The goat has given up. You inch closer. Your nose is now dry. Your lips are cracked. The front of your body is red from radiant heat. The back is a glacier. You consider flipping over. You remember the last time. That scar's still healing. In your half-sleep, you dream of fire. Not warm fire. A live fire. It's chasing you through the forest. Laughing. Taunting. It takes the shape of your uncle. It wears your tunic. It whispers that you'll never be warm again. You wake up coughing. The fire has gone low. You reach out to feed it a stick. You realize you were asleep with your hand in the ashes. Again, morning is close. Maybe. You are alive. You are scorched. You are winning. Kind of. Forget every modern fantasy you've ever had about lone wolf survival. The rugged individual. The self-sufficient hunter-gatherer building a snow fortress out of confidence and pine needles. That person, dead by sunset. In 7000 BC, if you don't belong to a group, you belong to the weather. And the weather has zero tolerance for freelancing. You share everything. The fire, the food, the lice, the goat, and the silence between screams. It's not optional. You do not own space. You borrow it. You do not sleep alone. You are strategically placed between two human furnaces with questionable hygiene, but excellent body heat. Your neighbors are not your friends. They are not your enemies. They are your insulation. You may hate the man who snores like a dying bear and occasionally steals your jerky, but if he dies in the night, your heat triangle collapses, and now you're on the edge of the human lasagna, exposed to the bitter chill of death. You nudge him awake every few hours, just in case. Sometimes someone goes quiet. Too quiet. You know that silence. The others do too. It spreads through the hut like frost. No one speaks. Someone leans over, checks for breath. There is none. And then there's a shift. Not grief, not yet, but logistical urgency. You have to move the body. Not for ceremony. For warmth management. Dead bodies cool fast, and they leach heat like vampires. So you slide the still form out toward the door flap. Carefully, respectfully, then you all squeeze closer. There's no room for sentimentality in a hut that's colder than honesty. When food is scarce, it's shared. Not equally, let's not pretend, but strategically. Elders eat first. The best hunters. The pregnant. The loudest complainers. You might get the burnt bits, but they're your burnt bits, and someone made sure you got them. Because tomorrow, you might be the one who brings back a rabbit. Or a deer. or a corpse that still has usable furs. There's always that one person who doesn't pull their weight. Everyone knows it. No one says it, not directly. Passive aggression is as old as fire. But when that person gets forgotten on the next wood gathering trip, no one asks questions. Natural selection happens socially. You learn quickly, either contribute or become kindling. You trade favors like currency. You sharpen someone's spear, they let you sit closer to the fire. You help with childbirth, they patch your shoes with hide. You give up your share of smoked roots today, they don't eat your squirrel tomorrow. It's not generosity, it's survival economics. Sometimes at night you talk, not deep talks. No one's philosophizing about the stars when they're wrapped in goat pelts and picking fleas out of their armpits. But someone tells a story. Someone grunts a joke. Someone sings the same three-note song that's older than language. For a few moments, you remember you're not just alive. You're among the living. Because the truth is simple and sharp as flint. If you go alone, you go cold. If you stay together, you might live. Maybe. There are no cathedrals, no scriptures, no organized priesthood in embroidered robes holding gold-plated incense. Not here, not in 7000 BC. There's only the wind, the fire, and your own terrifying imagination. Because when you live in a world where your neighbor can freeze to death mid-sentence and a bear can eat your cousin before sunrise, you start to ask questions. Not deep questions. Not yet. You don't have the words. But your soul is still screaming. So you do what all cold, confused, prehistoric people do. You invent gods. Lots of them. There's the fire spirit, who demands constant feeding and sulks if ignored. You learned this the hard way during the blizzard of 3 nights, when the coals went dark and your uncle never woke up. Since then, the fire gets offerings. Hair, a piece of meat, a carved figurine shaped like a bird. Maybe. You don't know why birds. It just feels right. There's the stone mother, who lives in the rocks and cracks your foot when you disrespect the cave walls. There's wind father, who howls when someone lies and steals your breath when you speak during storms. And let's not forget the thing in the forest, who you're not allowed to name. Because if you do, it shows up. And it's always hungry. Some people make idols, little lumpy things from mud and bone. They stick feathers in them. Bury them near the hearth. Talk to them when they think no one's listening. You try it once. You mold a god out of clay. Give it eyes made from beetle shells and leave it by the sleeping area. The next morning, 3 people call you a sorcerer, 2 children cry, and your idol is thrown into the river. You never mention it again. The elders lead ceremonies, if you can call them that. They hum, they chant, they wave smoke around and mutter words in a language no one really speaks anymore. No one questions it, because sometimes it works. The snow melts early. The fish return. A sick child recovers. You don't know if it was the ritual or luck, but you don't risk it. You've seen people whisper prayers into their hands, then blow them toward the fire. Others tie knots in deer sinew and hang them in trees, hoping it traps illness or fear. One woman paints her face with ash every full moon. No one asks why. Everyone just nods. And when someone dies, and someone always dies, there's ritual. Not burial, not always, but song are the closest thing to it. A slow, rising moan that spreads through the hut like smoke. You join in. You don't know the tune. You don't need to. It's the sound of grief when you don't have language. It's the sound of remembering without memory. There are no answers. There are only guesses carved into stone and sung to the snow. You don't believe the gods love you. You believe the gods notice you, which is enough. Love is for warmer centuries. So you pray in your own way, quietly, desperately, not for happiness, not for peace, just for one more sunrise. And if the sock tied to the fire pit helps, well, you're not taking it down. Here, it is the beginning of the end. You've suffered, adapted, begged warmth from stones and gods alike. But in 7000 BC, even your best efforts can crumble in a heartbeat. Because sometimes the cold doesn't kill you. Everything else does. It starts with wind. Not the usual kind that winds through cracks and lifts smoke from the fire like a whisper. No, this wind roars. It howls with a voice that sounds older than the trees. A voice that says, run. But you don't. Because where would you go? The sky is wrong. The color of iron and ash. The air stings your eyes before the snow even begins. You hear it first, the thud of frost-hardened flakes pounding the roof like fists. Then the walls moan. Not creak, moan, like the very mud and straw that keep you alive are ready to quit. You huddle inside the hut. Everyone does. Even the goats are inside. One of them pees in a fire pit and no one moves. There are too many bodies, not enough heat, and the door won't stay shut. The wind keeps finding it, clawing at it, biting around the edges like a wolf chewing bone. An elder tries to speak, tries to call for calm, but halfway through the sentence, the roof gives way. Not all of it, just enough. A heavy slab of wet snow and rotted thatch drops into the center of the room, straight onto the fire. Hiss, silence, darkness. The fire is out. At first, no one moves. Then panic. Someone screams. Someone else trips over the goat. You crawl, blindly, your fingers searching for embers, warmth, anything. The ash is cold. The flint is wet. The kindling is gone, buried in slush and wool. The cold moves in immediately, like a predator that's been waiting for its chance. You try to relight the fire. You try with stone, with breath, with desperation. It won't catch. You cut your hand. You burn your fingertip. Nothing works. The hut is now a tomb with a roof. The children start crying. The elders stop talking. You glance at warmth, your once dependable stone, and realize it's been cold for hours. Just a rock now. Useless. You throw it. It hits something soft. You don't check what. Someone opens the door to escape. The wind punches through, slamming into your face with ice that bites your gums. The flap rips loose. Gone. You see the blizzard now, full force. A white wall of obliteration. You slam the door, closed again. It doesn't matter. The damage is done. One of the younger men grabs a burning brand from a neighbor's hut. He stumbles in, coughing, eyes wide with fear and smoke. You got the fire back. You cheer. You try to cheer. But the torch is too dry. Too strong. He throws it into the pit, and the wall catches fire. You scream. Everyone does. Someone throws snow at the flames. Someone else throws a blanket. The fire eats both. In seconds, smoke chokes the room. The only thing worse than freezing is burning. And tonight you get to experience both. You flee, out into the storm, into the mouth of the world that's been trying to kill you all this time. You slip, you crawl, you carry a child who isn't yours. You leave someone who was. The next morning, or what counts as morning, the snow stops. The wind dies. The sun, weak and apologetic, peers through the gray. And you see the hut. Gone. Just a steaming pile of ash and bone. Half the tribe missing. Some dead. Some wandered. Some just gave up and stopped. You sit in the snow, burnt and frostbitten, with ash in your nose and silence in your ears. You're not crying. You're too tired for that. You just stare, because this is the cost. This is what happens when everything goes wrong in 7000 BC. And always does. You're alive. Barely. You've lost toes. You've lost people. You've lost the ability to feel warmth without suspicion. But when the ash settles, when the wind stops howling, you stand. Not because you're brave, but because your knees still work. You bury the dead. Not deep. The ground is frozen. You pile rocks, mutter sounds that feel like prayers, and walk away. You can't stay here. The hut is gone. The fire circle is black. Even the goat looks traumatized. It's time to move. And so you do, with the others who remain. Half your tribe, maybe less. You carry what you can: a cracked pot, a smoked root, a half-carved idol that someone swears kept them alive. You leave behind the rest, not because you want to, but because your arms are full and the sun is moving. You walk for days. No destination. Just away. Away from the ruin, from the screams, from the smell of burnt straw and flesh. You follow game tracks, river bends, old instincts carved into your blood long before you were born. And slowly, a new place takes shape. A new shelter, a new fire. A circle, smaller now, tighter, more quiet. People talk less, work more. Every stone is placed with memory. Every log laid with superstition. Every breath is a prayer that this time the roof won't cave in. But there's laughter too. Eventually. Not joy. Not yet, but something near it. A child draws a mammoth in ash on a cave wall. Someone carves a bird into bone and gives a name. You eat together again. You sleep closer than ever. You survive. And here's the part that stings. You think you'll be forgotten. You think all this pain, all this desperate fire chasing, bone cracking, frostbitten crawling will vanish the moment your body rots beneath a stone. But it doesn't. Because somewhere, 10,000 years later, a stranger will find your idol. Your spear tip. The black ring of your last fire. They'll wonder. They'll marvel. They'll name your world Neolithic. They'll write essays. They'll build museums. They'll say, these were the first humans to try, to fail, to try again. And they won't know your name. But they'll know you lived. They'll know you didn't die quietly. They'll know you mattered. Because your hands laid the first bricks. Your hunger invented fire circles. Your sorrow painted the first prayers. You, in your filth and frost and fear, built the world we stand on now. So no, you wouldn't last a day in 7,000 BC. But someone did, and that's why you're here. Long before the first stitch was sewn, before thread met fabric or pigment touched parchment, there was the human body, naked, vulnerable, and endlessly expressive. And from the very beginning, it was not left blank. The skin, warm and animate, became the first surface upon which humanity wrote. Before laws were carved in stone or symbols etched onto clay, meaning was cut, burnt, and inked into flesh. To live in the ancient world was to be read, to be seen not only as you were, but as you had been marked. And among the earliest of these markings, deeper even than language, were tattoos and scars. The first tattoos did not begin as ornament. They were born of pain, necessity, ritual. In the caves of Ice Age Europe, around 12,000 years ago, someone took a soot-covered thorn and pressed it into a wound. Not once. Repeatedly, deliberately. The skin raised. The wound darkened. And when it healed, a blackened line remained. It was crude, but it was permanent. And from that moment on, skin was no longer just skin. It was a message. Archaeologists call them abstract linear markings. They appear on the frozen skin of Otzi the Iceman, the 5,000-year-old mummy pulled from the alpine ice in 1991. His body bore over 60 dark tattoos, parallel lines and crosses inked into his ankles, spine, wrists. They were not decorative. Their placement suggests pain points. Perhaps they were medicinal, a primitive form of acupuncture. Or perhaps they were protective, charms etched into muscle and sinew to keep the spirits away. What matters is not just what they were, but that they were done at all. Pain was endured for meaning. Repetition made belief visible. Across the globe, from the Arctic Circle to the jungles of Borneo, similar marks emerged. In Siberia, the Pasira princess of the Altai Mountains, entombed in permafrost since the 5th century BCE, whereas elaborate tattoos of deer and mythical beasts swirling over her shoulders and arms in dark blue ink. Her people believed that the afterlife required recognition. Your ancestors would know you by your tattoos. To be buried unmarked was to risk being forgotten by the very spirits that held the keys to eternity. In these early societies, tattooing tools were as various as the cultures themselves. Sharpened bones, thorn branches, obsidian shards. The ink was soot, ash, ochre mixed with fat or plant resin. The body was both canvas and record. What was placed upon it could not be taken back. To cut the skin was to rewrite the self. A line on the thigh could mean bravery. A ring around the wrist might show initiation. A single dot below the eye could signify the death of a sibling, or a successful hunt, or a pact sealed in blood. These were not decorations, they were declarations. But tattoos were not the only script of the skin. Scarification, cutting or burning the skin in intricate patterns and allowing it to heal raised, flourished especially in cultures where dark skin made ink less visible. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Melanesia, and among indigenous Australians, scars became visual speech. Raised whorls across the belly told of childbirth. Parallel cuts across the forehead marked a warrior's first kill. Scarification was a brutal rite, yes, but one that transformed pain into identity. It was not just what you had survived, but how you wore it. To the modern observer, these marks can seem foreign, even violent, but they were anything but random. In a world before mirrors, your body told others who you were, what tribe you belonged to, what gods you worshipped, what victories you claimed, what griefs you carried. Skin became history, ethics, status, even prophecy. And it could be read like a book, but only by those who knew the language. Outsiders saw scratches. Insiders saw stories. The power of marking skin lay in its duality. It hurt and it healed. It bled and it beautified. It changed the way you moved through your community. You could not unmark yourself. The needle, whether thorn or bone, rewrote your place in the world. And so in the deep silence of prehistory, as flint struck fire and hands shaped stone, someone turned toward flesh. And in doing so, humanity found its first true medium of memory. This was not art for art's sake. It was survival through symbol. A shield worn on the body, invisible to none, permanent as bone. In ancient Egypt, where the desert sand shimmered like powdered gold and the Nile traced its sacred path through fields of green, the body was not merely flesh. It was sacred architecture. It could be prepared, purified, perfumed. It could be dressed in linen, soaked in oils, wrapped for eternity. But long before the embalmer's hands touched it in death, the living had already begun to write upon the skin. Egyptian tattoos are elusive. They do not appear in statues or tomb paintings, which favored idealized, unblemished bodies. But archaeology is patient. It waits beneath layers of silence, and then it speaks. In 2014, infrared imaging of a mummified woman from the village of Deir el-Medina revealed something astonishing. Over 30 tattoos, hidden for millennia beneath dried, leathery skin. Ankhs, lotus blossoms, cows with horns, and hieroglyphic symbols of power ran across her arms, shoulders, and neck. These were not idle doodles. They were talismans. They turned her body into a temple. This woman, likely a priestess or a music maker in the service of Hathor, the goddess of fertility, music, and joy, carried her devotion not in scrolls but on her skin. Her body was a votive offering, a hymn etched in flesh. Each mark mirrored symbols found on statues of gods. Her arms became banners of sanctity, her neck a pillar of invocation. No single tattoo said it all. It was the totality that sang. Earlier discoveries hinted at this. The famous Jebelline woman, dated to around 1300 BCE, bore tattoos of curved lines and dots across her shoulders and abdomen. These marks may have been medicinal, applied to relieve pain during childbirth or menstruation. Another mummy, known as Amunet, from the 11th dynasty, had diamond-shaped patterns on her thighs and lower torso, repetitive, deliberate, and rhythmic. Scholars have long debated their purpose. Healing? Protection? Identification? All are possible. In Egypt, as elsewhere, tattoos blurred the line between medicine and magic. Curiously, almost all tattooed remains from Egypt have been female. This may not mean men weren't tattooed. It may only mean their markings were different or placed where preservation did not favor them. But it suggests something more profound, that in Egyptian society, the female body was a particularly potent site of sacred inscription. In a culture obsessed with balance, Ma'at, the harmony of cosmos and earth, the act of marking the body was not random. It was a calculated offering. The tools were simple: a bone or copper needle, a pigment of carbon or ochre, a pattern memorized or handed down. But the process was intense. Pain, as always, was part of the ritual. There was no anesthetic beyond music or incense. The wound had to accept the ink. The body had to consent to change. Yet what emerged was more than scar or symbol. It was presence. To be tattooed in ancient Egypt was to be visible not to the eye, but to the gods. The marks could not be removed. They would accompany you beyond the grave, where recognition mattered. What you wore in death was not jewelry or perfume. It was identity, permanence, and power burned into skin. And so, in the land where the Book of the Dead guided souls and every amulet had purpose, the body itself became sacred text. The tattoos of ancient Egypt were not boasts. They were prayers, living scripture in human form. In the lands between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where kings dreamt in cuneiform and gods dined on incense and blood, the body was never simply a body. It was a ledger, a contract to claim. In ancient Mesopotamia, the skin bore witness to one's station, one's debt, one's god. And though tattooing did not flourish here as in other regions, the people of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria carved identity into flesh in other ways: scars, brands, and ritual mutilations that marked a person not with ink, but with authority and memory. Unlike Egypt, Mesopotamian texts do not celebrate tattoos. In fact, there is silence in the clay, an absence of explicit praise or practice. But absence in the historical record is not always absence in life. Instead, what we do find are references to bodily markings as punishment, ownership, and status. Slaves, for instance, were often branded. Their skin bore the signs of subjugation, the name of a master, a temple, or the symbol of a god. These were not hidden marks. They were warnings. This person is claimed. This person has no autonomy. Cuneiform tablets speak of this branding with bureaucratic coldness. One legal document from the Old Babylonian period recounts the sale of a woman who, upon purchase, is to be marked with the sign of the house of her master. Another prescribes punishment by mutilation. A thief who cuts off another's fingers shall have his own cut off in turn. The body was both law and enforcement. Its integrity could be altered by crime, by contract, or by cult. Yet beyond the brutal economy of control, there was another language of the skin, more sacred, more secretive. Certain priesthoods required ritual cuts or the shaving of a scalp. In the cults of Ishtar or Nergal, initiates may have been marked during ceremonies of submission and devotion. We do not know precisely what form these took, but from hints in liturgical texts and votive inscriptions, It is clear that the divine claimed not just the soul, but the body itself. Soldiers, too, may have worn their allegiance in blood. Assyrian military practices involved not only discipline and rank, but also ceremonial scars, lines drawn across shoulders or chests, perhaps meant to bind men to one another and to the state. In a society where war was constant and loyalty absolute, these markings were not vanity. They were contracts seared beneath the skin. Mesopotamian art gives us further clues. Reliefs from palaces show prisoners with notched ears or slashed cheeks. Acts of humiliation turned into public symbols. But what is humiliation to one class is honor to another. Among certain nomadic tribes to the west and east of the Fertile Crescent, facial scarification was a badge of lineage. Tribes were known by the pattern of cuts along the jaw or brow. In this way, even those outside the walled cities wrote their stories on skin. Perhaps most telling is the way Mesopotamians wrote their gods, not in paint or ink, but in the permanence of architecture and flesh. Temples were built to last. So were oaths. To swear loyalty to a temple or to a god often involved a bodily pledge. An ear pierced, a finger severed, a scar raised as evidence of devotion. It was not enough to believe. You had to bleed. And so, while the priests of Egypt painted symbols beneath the skin, the scribes of Babylon carved destinies into clay, and the bodies around them bore their own silent cuneiform. Raised welts, burned initials, missing fingers. In a world that worshipped record-keeping, the body became another tablet, pressed not with reeds, but with fire. In the orderly streets of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, where drains ran straight and walls were laid in perfect brick, the human body seems strangely silent. No grand murals, no boastful inscriptions, no royal tombs carved with scenes of conquest or divine favor. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished over 5,000 years ago along the banks of the Sarasvati and the Indus rivers, was a society that prized symmetry, water, and restraint. But if its cities were quiet, its people were not blank. They were likely marked quietly, ritually, permanently. We have no written text that we can read from the industry. Their script remains undeciphered. We cannot ask them directly what they believed or how they adorned their bodies. And yet, their terracotta figurines, small and enigmatic, hint at a culture of body consciousness. Women molded in clay wear bangles from wrist to shoulder. Hairstyles are sculpted with elaborate precision. And on some figurines, their incised lines find deliberate cuts across arms, thighs, or brows. These are not flaws of the kiln. They're suggestions of something more. Perhaps these were tattoos, or scarifications, or ceremonial body paints worn regularly enough to be modeled in clay. The famous bronze dancing girl, one of the most iconic figures of this civilization, stands nude but proud, with one hand on her hip and the other extended. Her arms are covered in bangles. Yes, but her confidence suggests something more than ornament. She is not coy. She is complete. Whether she was a dancer, priestess, or something in between, her body speaks. And what it says may be inscribed not in ink, but in ritual. Across South Asia, the traditions of tattooing and skin marking run deep, stretching back far beyond the historical record. Tribal communities in the subcontinent still practice forms of tattooing, known variously as Gadna, Mindi, and Kambatam, that are rich in ancestral memory. Dots, lines, and floral motifs placed on the forehead, chin, hands, or ankles often signify coming of age, marital status, or protective charm. It is entirely possible that these traditions echo a lineage that began with the people of the Indus. Their tools were simple: sharpened bone, carved stone, pigment from ash or turmeric. The same dyes used to color textiles and pottery could have easily colored flesh. The needles that stitch cloth may also have stitched skin. In a climate of intense heat and high humidity, clothing was light and the body was visible. The skin was both social surface and spiritual threshold. Yet what is most remarkable about Indus culture is not its restraint, but its balance. There is no evidence of exaggerated hierarchy in burial sites. No kings buried with gold. No skeletons weighed down by empires. Instead, we see a quiet egalitarianism. And so it may be that markings on the skin, tattoos, scars, or painted symbols were not displays of status, but of community. You were not trying to stand above your neighbors. You were trying to be seen among them. If the temples of Egypt shouted and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia commanded, the cities of the Indus whispered. And in that whisper, there was power. The body here may have been marked in ways now lost to time. Not with dramatic scars or heroic tattoos, but with symbols that honored water, fertility, rhythm, and memory. What is unseen is not always unmarked. What is undeciphered is not without meaning. And in the warm, humid silence of the Indus, the skin may have told stories in a language too subtle for stone, but perfect for flesh. On the sun-soaked island of Crete, where sea foam licked painted palaces and frescoes bloomed on stone walls, the body was not merely a vessel. It was an instrument. The Minoans, flourishing around 2000 BCE, built no colossal statues of warlords and no empire of iron. Instead, they built open-air courtyards, vivid wall paintings, and lives tuned to the rhythm of movement. Here, the body did not stand still for veneration. It spun, it leapt, it danced, and the marks it bore, if not cut into flesh, were nonetheless unmistakably inscribed through motion, color, and ritual exposure. In the frescoes of Knossos, women and men alike are shown in high-waisted belts, layered skirts, bare chests, and cascading hair. But look closer. Across these stylized limbs and torsos, there are patterns, dots, spirals, bands. Scholars have debated their purpose. Are they garments, jewelry, body paint, or something more permanent, like tattoos? The truth may lie somewhere in between, for the Minoan world was one in which the boundary between cloth and skin, costume and identity, was exquisitely blurred. Minoan women, especially, are depicted with bare breasts, adorned arms, and highly visible skin. Their bodies are not passive. They are agents, moving through ritual, performance, and ceremony. In such a culture, where clothing revealed rather than concealed, the act of marking the skin would have carried profound significance. Whether painted or inked, these marks would have been part of choreography itself, gliding with the body's gestures, shimmering under sunlight during acrobatic rites or processions. A spiral on the shoulder might spin with the dancer. A dotted line down the spine might echo the arc of a backflip. The Minoans were no strangers to sacred blood. Bull leaping, the most iconic of their rituals, required grace, strength, and fearlessness. To grasp the horns of a charging animal and vault over its back was not simply entertainment. It was initiation, communion, almost a rebirth. Survivors of such rites may have been honored, not just in myth, but in flesh. A cut, a scar, or a painted emblem could say, "I flew with the bull. I survived. I am changed." Though no preserved skin has come to us from Minoan bodies, their art speaks volumes. And in that art, it is the body itself that dominates, not as an abstract ideal, but as a central figure of religious and social power. The skin was a stage. Color and gesture were its language. Across the Mediterranean, later cultures would adopt similar practices. Body painting among Etruscans, tattooing among Thracians, scarification in Anatolia. But Crete seems to mark an earlier moment, one where the act of being seen was inherently sacred. To be marked in Minoan culture may not have required a needle. It may have required firelight, pigment, rhythm, and the beating of a drum. Perhaps the Minoans saw the skin not as something to scar, but as something to awaken, a place where divinity could dance. And so their marks, if not permanent in the archaeological record, were likely etched into memory, bold, brief, and breathtaking, like the flicker of a body leaping across painted stone. In ancient China, where dynasties rose and fell like the ebb of a river, and the body was viewed through the prism of harmony and hierarchy, the skin was sacred, but not to be written upon. The notion of marking the body with ink or blade was not merely frowned upon. It was, in many eras, a moral violation. The body, said Confucius, was a gift from one's parents and ancestors. To defile it with cuts, burns, or tattoos was a breach of filial piety, a scar not just on flesh, but on family. And yet, the paradox endures. While tattoos were condemned, they were never absent. In early Chinese history, particularly during the Zhou and Qin dynasties, tattooing, known as Wenshun, literally patterning the body, was used not to honor but to punish. It was one of the 5 punishments, wuxing, for criminals. Facial tattoos that broadcasted guilt to all who saw. Thieves, traitors, debtors. They were marked with permanent characters on the cheeks or forehead. These were not symbols of pride. They were warnings, a walking record of shame. But punishment was not the whole story. Far from the courts and codes of imperial capitals, China's borderlands told a different tale. Among the Yu people of the south and the tribes along the Yangtze and Pearl rivers, tattoos were symbols of strength, beauty, and identity. Fishermen inked their skin with serpents and dragons to ward off water spirits. Warriors bore animal motifs for protection in battle. In some coastal communities, it was believed that tattooing the body kept sea monsters at bay. What was taboo in the center was tradition at the margins. This tension between central orthodoxy and peripheral expression would persist throughout Chinese history. The Han court might condemn tattoos as barbaric, but the tattooed were often proud. In the epic novel Water Margin, written in the Ming Dynasty, the hero Song Jiang is famously tattooed with characters down his back. He is an outlaw, yes, but a righteous one. His ink is rebellion, justice, and unshakable will. Meanwhile, Buddhist monks practiced another kind of marking, devotional scarification. Monks branded their scalps or arms with incense or hot metal. Rings of small burns that represented their vows, their discipline, their transcendence over flesh. These burns were not shameful. They were sacred. In a culture where to tattoo was profane, to burn could be divine. And even within the core of Chinese civilization, the body was not without subtle inscription. High-born women, forbidden from tattooing, found other ways to speak through the skin. Delicate rouge, powdered pearl, and traces of plum blossom ink on the neck or forehead became socially acceptable forms of adornment. Ephemeral, but no less expressive. Beauty marks were sometimes applied deliberately. Their placement could flirt, suggest, or conceal. To mark the skin in China, then, was to cross a boundary between center and edge, order and rebellion, piety and pride. It was both crime and declaration. A stroke of ink could damn you or define you. A scar could bring shame or salvation. The body, as ever, was never neutral. And so, in the land of silk, where garments whispered class and ritual dictated the shape of sleeves, the naked skin remained contentious ground. To mark it was to make a choice, sometimes imposed, sometimes defiant, always remembered. In the cool rationality of ancient Greece, where symmetry was truth and the human body a temple of proportion, the skin was a canvas most revered when untouched. To mark it, to pierce, or stain it was to disrupt the measured lines of nature. Beauty lay in balance, not in decoration. And yet, even in this culture of moderation and marble, the body was still marked, though not always willingly. Among freeborn Greek citizens, tattooing was considered a barbaric practice, a custom of foreigners and slaves. To bear a tattoo was to bear a history of subjugation. In Athens, when rebellion had to be punished not just swiftly but permanently, the body became the sentence. Captured enemies of the state were sometimes tattooed with humiliating symbols or words. After the failed expedition to Sicily during the Peloponnesian War, Athenian generals branded prisoners with emblems of shame. The mark was not just for the body, it was for the soul. Yet outside the polis, the practice was more complicated. Among the Thracians, Scythians, and other barbaroi at Greece's edges, tattooing was an honored custom. These neighboring cultures adorned their warriors and women alike with spirals, beasts, and sacred lines. Greek historians, Herodotus among them, recorded these practices with a mixture of fascination and disdain. They noted that among the Thracians, the more tattoos, the more noble the person. A reversal of Greek values, where nobility meant unmarked flesh and a clean lineage. Still, the boundary was not impermeable. In Sparta, where bodily austerity was revered but war was life, scars were worn as silent badges. Spartan boys, trained from the age of 7 in the agoge, bore the wounds of discipline like second skins. These were not ritual scars, but the results of deliberate deprivation and combat. A well-scarred body in Sparta did not suggest brutality, it suggested worth. Even outside the military, certain marks were tolerated, even respected. Wrestlers, athletes, and warriors who triumphed in the Panhellenic Games bore visible signs of their toil. Muscle was celebrated, but so was evidence of pain. A nose broken in the ring, a callus worn through daily training. These were unscripted inscriptions, carved not by tool, but by effort. To suffer for glory was divine. Religious rituals also left their trace. In the rites of Dionysus, the god of wine, frenzy, and divine ecstasy, worshippers sometimes engaged in self-wounding, ecstatic dances that blurred the line between celebration and surrender. The Bacchae, robed in ivy and fire, let their bodies be vessels of possession. The scratches they bore, the bruises, the blood, these were not shameful. They were proof that the god had entered them. Yet for all their reverence of unmarked form, the Greeks knew that the body remembered. The philosopher Anaxagoras once mused that man is the wisest of animals because he has hands. But it was also true that man was most vulnerable because he had skin. In Homer's Iliad, warriors are recognized by the scars they carry. Odysseus, returning home in disguise, is identified not by face or voice, but by the scar on his thigh, earned in youth. It is his mark of truth. Flesh does not lie. Thus, in a world of ideals, the Greeks could not escape the gravity of the physical. They dreamed in ratios and debated virtue, but still bled in battle, branded prisoners, and watched their bodies tell stories they could not always control. Even in marble, the human figure was frozen mid-motion, robes clinging to imagined flesh, veins suggested beneath stone. The perfection they sought was not absence of pain, but its mastery. And so, the Greek skin, though rarely inked, was never truly unmarked. It bore philosophy and discipline, tragedy and scars, and myth and muscle. If the eye of the beholder was trained in reason, the body still whispered deeper truths, etched not with ink, but with life. In Rome, power wore many faces, wreathed in laurel, wrapped in toga, armed with decree. But the truest face of empire was written not in marble, nor law, but flesh. For the Romans, skin was a battlefield of meaning, a surface upon which citizenship, slavery, punishment, and devotion could be carved. If Greece idealized the body as sacred form, Rome reduced it to function, and if need be, to spectacle. Tattooing in the Roman world was called stigma, a word that would echo down the centuries with shadows of shame. Unlike the tribal tattoos of Rome's northern and eastern enemies, stigmata in the empire were tools of discipline. Branding was reserved for slaves, criminals, deserters, and prisoners of war. A runaway might be marked with FUG, fugitivus, burned into his forehead or thigh. A thief might bear the word fur across his chest. These were not rumors. They were sentences, irremovable, public, and cruel. Legal texts from the Roman jurist Ulpian outline these practices with dispassionate precision. To be tattooed was not only to be punished, it was to be repositioned within the social order, visibly and irrevocably. A man so marked could not become a citizen. A slave so branded could not pass as free. The empire's bureaucracy extended not just through scrolls and inscriptions, but through skin. The body became a passport and a prison. And yet, like all imperial instruments, the tattoo had more than one blade. In the Roman military, particularly in later centuries, soldiers too were sometimes tattooed, not as punishment, but as allegiance. The historian Vegetius refers to legionaries marked with signs of their unit or oath. These were not public brands, but symbols of identity and belonging. In a world of constant campaigns and shifting loyalties, the body became a contract. Once inscribed, a man belonged to Rome. This practice may have drawn influence from Rome's contact with its eastern provinces, especially Egypt and Syria, where sacred tattooing had long histories. Among early Christians, too, tattoos began to emerge not as penalties, but as professions of faith. Pilgrims to Jerusalem marked themselves with crosses, chiro symbols, or lines of scripture, silent declarations carved into skin. For them, flesh was a testament. But even among Rome's elites, the body was never neutral. Gladiators, adored and doomed, carried their scars like crowns. Each wound told a story. A near miss, a victorious slash, a survival. These were not mere injuries. They were hieroglyphs of pain, read by crowds and patrons alike. A heavily scarred back suggested cowardice, turning away from the fight. A chest covered in slashes was nobler. It meant one faced death head-on. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king of a weary world, once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But for most Romans, it was the body that bore the hues of life. Scars, brands, burns, and inked shame or honor. The soul, perhaps, remained private. The skin never did. What marked Roman society most was its obsession with categorization. Everyone had a place, a role, a uniform. And if uniforms could be taken off, tattoos could not. They were the final bureaucracy, the self-made document. In Rome, your skin could betray you or protect you, depending on who read it. So the empire, vast and blood-fed, left its traces not just on maps, but on men. Every road led to Rome, but not everyone walked it unmarked. Behind the marble arches and golden eagles, the body bore the true legacy of conquest, pain, permanence, and the politics of the flesh. Beyond the edges of Rome, past the limes and the watchtowers, where forests thickened and snow fell like judgment, lived people whom the empire called barbarians. The word itself, barbaros, was meant to mock, to reduce, to define others by what they were not. But the peoples of the north, the Celts, the Scythians, the Picts, the Germanic tribes, had no need for Roman approval. They had their own languages, their own gods, and most vividly, their own ways of marking the body. Where Rome wrote laws on parchment, these tribes wrote identity into the skin. Julius Caesar, never shy with exaggeration, wrote in his Commentariae de Bello Gallico that the Britons paint themselves with woad, which gives them a blue color in battle. This image of wild, indigo warriors has haunted Western imagination ever since. Feral, defiant, terrible to behold. But behind the drama lies something real. Body marking in these northern cultures was both common and deeply meaningful. Whether through tattooing, scarification, or body painting, skin became a text of lineage, tribe, and cosmic belief. Among the Celts, tattooing may have served both decorative and spiritual functions. Animals, knots, and geometric patterns, now echoed in surviving Celtic art, may once have spiraled across arms, backs, and faces. These were not simply adornments. They were talismans, genealogies, and declarations of who one was and whom one served. A warrior did not enter battle merely with sword and shield. He carried his ancestors across his skin. The Picts of ancient Scotland were particularly renowned for their body markings. Roman sources describe them as painted or tattooed from head to toe, their bodies cloaked in abstract forms and animals. The name Picti itself, Latin for painted people, speaks to this identity. For the Picts, tattoos may have marked stages of life: puberty, marriage, warfare. Each image carved a chapter in a life story, visible to gods and kin alike. In Scythia, across the steppes of Central Asia, tattooed nobles were buried with pride. The frozen mummies of the Altai Mountains, men and women both, bear tattoos of fantastical creatures: deer with curling antlers, griffins with taloned wings. These were not criminals. These were elites, their skin inked in signs of power, death, and rebirth. In a world where the soul might travel beyond the grave, your tattoos helped guide the way. These cultures did not use tattoos as punishment. They used them as memory, as belonging, as preparation for the afterlife. Even among the Germanic tribes, who were more reserved in tattooing, scarification, and ritual wounding played crucial roles. A cut across the chest could signify a warrior's first blood. A notched ear might mark a vow. Among some groups, a tooth knocked out during adolescence was part of becoming a man. Pain was not something to be hidden. It was embraced, ritualized, made holy. To bleed was to prove. To heal was to endure. In this world, skin was the oldest language, and every mark was a word. These societies had no written books. Their bodies were their scrolls. To the Romans, these marks were signs of savagery. But that view missed the point. The tribes of the north understood something the empire had forgotten. The body is not shameful. It is an altar. It is a flag. It is a vessel of ancestry, devotion, and will. To walk through life unmarked was not dignity. It was absence. So when the empire finally fell, it did not take the language of the skin with it. The inked, the scarred, the painted, they survived. And with them, so did the stories. Whispered in forests, sung in smoke, drawn in the grooves of the living. Across millennia and continents, through deserts, jungles, battlefields, and birth chambers, one truth endures: the body remembers. It remembers pain. It remembers ritual. It remembers identity etched not in ink alone, but in blood, in fire, in silence. Long before memory could be externalized in books or temples, it lived beneath the skin. Every civilization we have traced, whether weaving linen in the Nile or tattooing deer spirits in the Altai, found some way to speak through the flesh. To mark the body was to claim it. To mark another was to define them. Across these practices lies a spectrum, from reverence to repression, from empowerment to enslavement. In some cultures, tattoos were prayers. In others, they were punishments. In all, they were permanent. The earliest marks were probably for protection, simple lines or dots pressed in a skin to ward off cold, disease, or demons. But over time, those marks took on new layers. They became signs of kinship, of faith, of desire, of rage. A mother might ink her dead child's name into her wrist. A warrior might cut his chest to grieve a fallen brother. A slave might be branded by a master who feared forgetting his own property. Each mark became a page, a sentence, sometimes a single word in the autobiography of the body. And yet, the language of skin was never universal. What one culture saw as holy, another saw as disgrace. In Egypt, tattoos adorned priestesses but were absent from kings. In China, they damned criminals while uplifting monks. In Greece, they humiliated the conquered. Among the Celts, they honored the free. No mark spoke for all, but all marks spoke of meaning. Even today, we echo these ancient patterns. A modern tattoo might be decorative, rebellious, ironic, but it is still a declaration. Even if the ink is chosen casually, the body takes it seriously. The skin heals, but it never forgets. And for many, the choice to mark the body is a way of reclaiming it from illness, from trauma, from erasure. A way of saying, I exist. I endured. I decided. In modern prisons, tattoos still mark hierarchy, crime, faith. In sacred traditions, they still bless, protect, initiate. Polynesian tattooing revived with pride. Berber women's chin marks still visible in Morocco. Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem inked in the same shops as their 12th century predecessors. The past is not gone. It's just healed over. And even scars, those unplanned, unsought cousins of the tattoo, still carry meaning. A cesarean line across a belly. A knife wound turned into art. A self-harm scar now covered in flowers. Each is a sentence in the story. Some want to forget. Others choose to remember. But the skin has no preference. It holds everything. We are taught to see the body as changeable, fragile, fleeting. But in truth, it is our most enduring archive. Bones may outlast skin, yes, but bones say little. The skin records the moments we felt most alive, most afraid, most human. So in the end, the question is not whether we are marked. It is only how and why. Because whether by thorn or ink, blade or brand, pigment or memory, the skin, your skin, was never blank. It was always a story waiting to be told. She entered history without a name, or rather, her birth name, if it was ever recorded, has long been devoured by time. She may have come from Turkic steppes or Armenian highlands, born to a family of merchants, herders, or soldiers. But it hardly mattered. Like thousands of girls before her, she was taken, purchased, or gifted into the world of slavery. And in that world, identity was not inherited. It was assigned, and it was always provisional. When she arrived in Egypt in the early 13th century, she was not yet Shajar al-Dur. She was simply one of many in the women's quarters, part of a concubine cohort trained to entertain, obey, and disappear. The Mamluk system had long depended on imported bodies, young boys to be trained as slave soldiers, young girls to populate the harems of sultans and emirs. These were not passive existences. Beneath the silks and perfumes, the women of the palace lived in a world of competition, education, and survival. She was beautiful, that much the sources agree on. Beautiful enough to attract the attention of Al-Salih Ayyub, a prince of the Ayyubid dynasty, a man of ambition, military genius, and ruthless calculation. He had inherited his father's empire not as a unified realm, but as a battlefield of jealous brothers, rebellious emirs, and encroaching crusaders. For a man like Al-Salih, every alliance counted. Every relationship was a wager. When he chose this unnamed woman as his concubine, it was not just for beauty. It was for presence, intelligence, composure under pressure, and something else, an aura of knowing how to listen and when to remain absolutely silent. He named her Shajar Aldur, Tree of Pearls. Whether this was a poetic invention or a purchase label, it stuck. And unlike so many others who passed through the halls of Cairo's citadel unseen, she refused to be forgotten. She studied court life as a tactician studies terrain. She watched the whispers, the arrangements of seating, the gifts exchanged, the eunuchs' routines. She learned the names of ministers, the power of palace scribes, and most importantly, the hierarchy of the harem. Not by rank, but by influence. By the time she bore Al-Salih's son, she had become more than a favored concubine. She had become indispensable. That child, though, would die young. And yet, strangely, her position did not weaken. In a court that prized heirs above all, her survival was an anomaly and a signal. She was not kept for maternal legacy. She was kept for what she knew, for what she could do, and for how well she performed in a theater where missteps could be fatal. In time, Al-Salih married her, elevating her from concubine to wife, an unusual, politically charged move. It raised eyebrows. It also raised her power. Now, she was not merely Shajar al-Dur, consort of the Sultan. She was his confidant, his shadow advisor, and in some chambers, his voice. When he left Cairo for military campaigns, she often remained behind, not secluded, but operational. She oversaw correspondence, arranged bribes, placated rivals, and tracked the movements of crusader fleets. No woman in the Ayyubid dynasty had held such authority. But Shajar al-Dur was not merely a woman in power. She was a woman preparing for something far greater, to wield power in her own name. She would need every ounce of resolve, for the storm was coming. The Ayyubid Empire was fracturing. The Crusaders were landing. The Sultan was dying, and the Tree of Pearls was about to root herself in the very heart of Egyptian history. The Sultan died behind veiled doors, his body failing just as his kingdom teetered on the edge of invasion. Al-Salih Ayyub, master of armies, veteran of palace intrigue, the last strong pillar of the Ayyubid realm, succumbed to illness in his fortress on the island of Rhoda, just as the Seventh Crusade arrived on Egyptian shores. And the world was not ready to know it. Neither, perhaps, was Shajar al-Dur. But unlike others who might have collapsed into grief or ritual, she did not tremble. She calculated. News of the Sultan's death would mean chaos. The Crusaders, led by the ambitious and devout King Louis IX of France, had already seized the port of Damietta. Egyptian morale was brittle. The Mamluk army, loyal to the Sultan above all else, might fragment if leadership seemed absent. The emirs, those sharp-eyed men always circling power like vultures over a wounded lion, would descend. The succession was unclear, and most dangerous of all, no one knew. And so Shajar al-Dur did the unthinkable. She hid the death of the Sultan. With the help of trusted eunuchs and the inner circle of Mamluk commanders, she kept the body preserved, perfumed, swathed, and placed in a cold chamber. She continued issuing orders in his name. She signed letters, stamped decrees, handled payments, and directed generals. Every act as if her husband were merely ill and recovering, tucked away behind layers of silk and incense. It was a deception worthy of empire. But it was more than that. It was leadership in its rawest, most necessary form, to hold the state together, even through illusion. She communicated with the front lines. She coordinated supplies to the troops at Mansoura, the vital city blocking the Crusaders' path to Cairo. The Mamluk commanders, especially the formidable Faris ad-Din Aktay and the rising star Baybars Albun Duktari, accepted her authority. Perhaps they saw in her what the court had tried to ignore for years, that she was not simply the Sultan's wife. She was a political force in her own right. For weeks, possibly longer, the ruse held. The Crusaders advanced, but the capital did not fall into panic. Orders continued. Soldiers obeyed. The machinery of rule, powered by one woman's will, stayed oiled. And when the time came to finally admit the truth, when the corpse could no longer be hidden and the illusion risked more than it protected, Shajar al-Dur did not fade into widowhood. She stepped forward. She announced the death, but not as a powerless relic of a bygone ruler. She declared that the state was still functioning, that she, Shajar al-Dur, was continuing her husband's work, that the army remained united, and she had the support to prove it. In a world ruled by men, among a dynasty built on masculine conquest and bloodline, a woman had just kept the country from collapse. She had ruled in secret. Now, she would prepare to rule in truth. The Crusaders were not yet defeated. The emirs were not yet silenced. But a new name was being whispered in the corridors of power. No longer just a tree of pearls. Now, something sharper, something rooted, something sovereign. Shajar al-Dur had entered history, and she would not leave quietly. War has no patience for propriety. It comes clothed not in banners, but in mud, blood, and confusion. And in the winter of 1249, war came to Egypt's heart not as a crusade of piety, but as a grinding, brutal siege. The French king, Louis IX, had taken Damietta easily, far too easily, and believed the rest of Egypt would crumble in kind. But he had not yet met Mansoura. He had not yet met the Mamluks. And he had certainly not yet met the woman orchestrating resistance from behind a veil of silk and steel. Mansoura, meaning the victorious, was a city built like a fist. Guarding the Nile's path south toward Cairo, it stood between the Crusaders and the capital. And now it became the stage for the most vicious engagement of the entire Seventh Crusade. The French forces, well-armored and sanctified, expected another easy march. What they encountered instead was a well-coordinated Mamluk counteroffensive, sharpened by necessity and guided by the invisible hand of Shajar al-Dur. Though she did not stand on the battlefield, her presence was felt in every sword drawn. Supplies reached the front not by miracle, but by her planning. Reinforcements arrived because she held the capital together long enough to muster them. And the commanders, Baybars and Aktay foremost among them, fought with the knowledge that their true loyalty was no longer to a dead sultan, nor even to the fragmented Ayyubid court, but to the woman who had proven herself steadier than both. Baybars, young and brilliant, devised the ambush that would define the battle. Luring the Crusaders into Mansoura streets, he turned the city into a trap. French knights, heavy with armor and arrogance, found themselves bogged in narrow alleys, unable to maneuver. Egyptian troops struck from rooftops, windows, mosques. What had seemed like a triumphant advance became a slaughter. King Louis watched his army disintegrate. His brother, Robert of Artois, led the vanguard into the city and was killed. Panic spread through the ranks. Retreat became chaos. And all the while, the Nile watched, silent and patient, as it always had, flowing past centuries of empires and ash. Back in Cairo, Shajar al-Dur received reports not as a spectator, but as a commander. She read them not with fear, but calculation. The Mamluks had delivered a stunning victory, but the campaign was not over. The Crusaders, though battered, still occupied the Delta. Louis himself was still alive. Capturing him would not just end the invasion. It would humiliate the West and elevate the East. And so the noose tightened. Baybars pursued. Shajar al-Dur made certain that resources kept flowing and spies kept watching. When Louis IX was finally cornered at Al-Muhammadiyah and captured, it was not the glory of one general. It was the culmination of a strategy shaped by a woman who had no formal authority, no official title, and no precedent. She had beaten a king. When news of the French defeat reached Europe, it was a scandal. When word spread in Egypt, it was a revelation. Who had guided this resistance? Who had held the realm together? Who had faced down both foreign kings and internal chaos? The answer was no longer whispered. It was spoken aloud, sometimes in awe, sometimes in fear. Shajar al-Dur. For centuries, the throne of Egypt had only ever held the weight of man. The caliphates, the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, each have been dynasties of sons, of brothers, of sultans crowned in the name of conquest and masculinity. Power, in theory and in blood, flowed only through men. Women might influence, might whisper, might counsel, but never rule. And yet, in the spring of 1250, the rules cracked. And through that fracture stepped Shajar al-Dur. Her path to power had not been plotted. There was no blueprint, no formal succession to follow. Her claim came not from bloodline, but from necessity, proven talent, and the reluctant acknowledgement of men who had no better choice. The Ayyubid dynasty was in tatters, its surviving princes either feuding, too distant, or too weak. The Sultan was dead. The Crusaders were defeated. The capital needed a ruler. And Egypt, for a rare and incandescent moment, did not ask for lineage. It asked for leadership. The Mamluks knew what the emirs pretended not to. Without Shajar al-Dur, the realm would have fallen. Her rule had been unofficial but absolute during the crisis. Now it was time to make it real. The decision was not unanimous. There was protest. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, spiritually supreme though politically distant, refused to recognize a woman as sovereign. "You must find a man," he declared, "for there is no blessing in the rule of a woman." But Cairo had already made its choice. The royal mint struck coins bearing her name. Al-Malika Shajar al-Dur, Queen Shajar al-Dur. The Friday sermons, the khutbah, invoked her title in the mosques. This was the true test of rule in the Islamic world, to be named from the pulpit and stamped in silver. And she passed. In that moment, Egypt had a sultana, not a regent, not a placeholder, not a consort, a ruler. She dressed not as a seductress, but as a sovereign. She sat in council with the Mamluk generals. She issued decrees. She received foreign ambassadors. She held court beneath banners embroidered with her name. And she ruled not from behind a screen, but in the open, with judgment sharp as a blade and memory long as dynastic grief. Still, she knew the limits. The emirs tolerated her, but uneasily. The caliph's disapproval rippled like distant thunder. And the Mamluks, though loyal, were soldiers, not scribes of law. Her reign was a miracle, but also a moment borrowed from the future, a flicker of what might have been a world less bound by patriarchy. To quiet opposition, she married a man of the sword, Faris ad-Din Aibak, a senior Mamluk commander. It was a tactical union, not a romantic one. He would serve as the outward symbol of male legitimacy, while she continued to hold the reins behind the veil. The caliph was appeased. Egypt appeared to be ruled by a man once more. But everyone in the palace knew the truth. The throne may have had his name on it, but the powers still wore pearls. They called him Sultan, but his sword was borrowed. Faris ad-Din Aibak, once a commander in the Mamluk ranks, now wore the crown that had been forged in crisis and held aloft by a woman's will. The marriage had been political theater, a concession to the caliph in Baghdad, to the theologians who murmured about precedent, and to the courtiers who flinched at the sight of a woman on the throne. But everyone who mattered understood. Egypt was still ruled by Shajar al-Durr. The arrangement was delicate. Aibak had the title, the regalia, the ceremonial duties. But Shajar al-Durr kept the court moving. She managed the finances, received reports, reviewed appointments, and ensured that the army remained cohesive and loyal, not to Aibak, but to the vision of order she had preserved during Egypt's darkest hour. Ministers came to her chambers before they approached the Sultan. Envoys whispered her name first, and the Mamluks, pragmatic to the bone, gave their allegiance to whoever kept the pay coming and the system intact. At first, Aibak tolerated this. He was no fool. He knew he owed everything, his position, his prestige, even his survival, to the woman who had pulled Egypt back from the brink. But time corrodes gratitude, and the longer he sat beneath a borrowed crown, the more he began to resent the hand that had placed it there. There were tensions carefully hidden. At public audiences, she stood a little behind him now. At councils, she spoke second. Her seal appeared less frequently on documents. Her name was invoked more quietly. But it was a fiction, and fiction has limits. Behind closed doors, she still ruled. She managed court appointments, brokered quiet truces between rival emirs, and made decisions that Aibak merely ratified. The palace became a hall of shadows, where two sovereigns shared one throne, one visible, one invisible. And invisibility, she knew, was both a shield and a danger. It was not only Aibak who chafed. His retainers, his political allies, new men hungry for space, began to whisper. Why was the Sultan so often overruled? Why did the treasury still pass through her hands? Why did the Mamluks defer to a woman? Why, after all, had she not stepped aside? But Shajar al-Durr had not survived slavery, court politics, a crusade, and a power vacuum to fade now into domestic silence. She had fought too long to protect Egypt, to defend her own name, and to build a legacy no other woman had ever dared to attempt. And if Aibak thought she would surrender power easily, he did not understand the tree from which she had been carved. Still, she adapted. She observed. She waited. For in Cairo, no reign, hidden or otherwise, was ever truly secure. And shadows, after all, are sharpest just before the strike. There are no quiet thrones, only chairs with blades hidden beneath the cushion. And in the court of Cairo, the blades had begun to shift. What had begun as a calculated alliance was now fraying at every seam. Shajar al-Durr, the once undisputed architect of Egypt's salvation, now found herself surrounded not by loyalists, but by watchers, advisors loyal to Aibak, informants whispering between chambers, and the slow, creeping sensation that her name was being erased stroke by stroke from the scrolls of power. Faris ad-Din Aibak, her husband, her sultan, had grown bolder with every moon. Once content to rule in name, he had begun gathering allies of his own. Petty emirs, ambitious clerics, even foreign agents. He strengthened his ties to the rising Mamluk factions, those who had not sworn themselves to her, but to him. And, most tellingly, he began considering a second marriage. Not just any union, a marriage to the daughter of the Ayyubid Emir of Mosul. It was a political move meant to seal alliances, cement legitimacy, and signal to the world, especially to the shadowy caliph in Baghdad, that Egypt was once again ruled by a man whose lineage could be trusted. whose wives were suitably silent. It was, in effect, a statement. Shajar al-Dur had served her purpose. Now she could step aside, but she would not. Not for a girl from Mosul. Not for a puppet sultan who had mistaken borrowed authority for real power. Not after everything. She knew the court. She knew the rhythms of betrayal. The doors that stayed too long ajar. The sudden changes in tone. The mutterings of palace guards. She had risen too far, too fast, to pretend that she could retreat into obscurity. If Ibak meant to cast her off, if he dared to strip her of her rank, her influence, her very survival, then he had declared a war he could not win. And so, she chose preemption. The plot was swift, brutal, and silent. Ibak was summoned to her private chambers. A reunion was staged, a gesture of reconciliation, of softness, a final embrace before the knife. Historians do not agree on the exact details. Some say she struck the fatal blow herself. Others claim she gave the order and her loyal eunuchs carried it out. But the outcome was certain. The Sultan of Egypt, husband of Shajar al-Dur, lay dead in a bathhouse, his ambitions drowned in red. It should have ended there. Power, once again in her hands. A kingdom cleansed of threat. But Cairo did not forgive easily. The murder of a sultan, even one installed as a fig leaf for male pride, was a scandal too large to contain. The Mamluks were divided. The emirs, especially those aligned with Ibak's faction, demanded retribution. The streets began to murmur, and the silence that once protected her began to crack. The woman who had once ruled in secret now found herself alone, exposed and encircled. The knife beneath the silk had struck, but the blade, as ever, cuts both ways. Power abandons quietly. It does not scream as it leaves your side. It simply stops returning your gaze. And for Shajar al-Dur, once the unseen hand behind Egypt's crown, the silence grew heavier with every hour that passed after Ibak's death. What she had calculated as a final maneuver, a purge to preserve her rule, had instead fractured the foundation beneath her feet. The murder of Ibak, no matter how justifiable it had seemed to her in the calculus of survival, had triggered a storm far beyond what even she could weather. His allies, still entrenched in the court, turned swiftly against her. The Mamluks, those former slave soldiers who had once carried her will across the Nile and against the Crusaders, split in their loyalty. Some remembered her as the Mother of Victory. Others whispered a darker name now, murderess. The harem turned colder. The court turned sharper. And the air in Cairo, always dense with dust and perfume, now stung with something worse. Vindication, wearing the face of vengeance. Ibak's teenage son, Al-Mansur Ali, was hastily proclaimed sultan by Ibak's faction. He was a child, more symbol than sovereign, but he gave the opposition a banner to rally behind. The people, stirred by sermons and rumor, demanded answers. The caliph's earlier disapproval of a woman's rule now sounded like prophecy to the conservative classes. Her once glorious name, stamped on coins, carved into the rhythms of court life, was suddenly venomous. Then came the arrest. No royal farewell. No cloisteré d'exil. Dragged from the palace by soldiers she had once paid. Stripped not only of power, but of dignity. She, who had signed decrees and directed battles, was thrown into a tower room like a servant caught stealing. The chronicles say little of what she felt. They rarely do, for women in disgrace vanish not only from politics, but from language. But one account, terse and brutal, survives, that she was beaten to death by palace servants, eunuchs wielding their hands and slippers in place of formal executioners. A death both ignominious and symbolic, designed to humiliate more than punish. Her body, once cloaked in silks and authority, was cast from power with no tomb, no public mourning, no procession. The Tree of Pearls, who had weathered crusades and caliphs, who had ruled in a world that forbade her very presence and power, had been felled, not by foreign armies, not by fate, but by the very system she had dared to master. And yet, even in death, her legacy remained stubborn. Coins with her name still circulated. Poems, veiled in metaphor, whispered of a queen who ruled without permission. And history, for all its resistance, could not entirely erase her. She had worn the crown. She had outwitted empires. She had held the scepter when others ran from the fire. Her death was intended as an erasure, but instead it became an epitaph written not in ink, but in defiance. History forgets easily, but it never forgets completely. Its memory is uneven, partial, shaped by those who build monuments and those who burn them. And yet, somewhere beneath the noise, in the hollows between stone and silence, the name of Shajar al-Durr continues to breathe. She ruled for just a heartbeat in dynastic time, months, not decades. No grand tomb was raised for her, no official biography etched in marble. The scribes, mostly men, wrote her reign in cautious lines, or worse, buried it in shame. A woman who dared to wear the crown was too dangerous to celebrate, and too unforgettable to ignore. And so, she lived on, not in palaces but in paradox. To some, she was the savior of Egypt, the strategist who held the realm together during the invasion of the Seventh Crusade, who delivered the kingdom from foreign boots and internal collapse. The widow who ruled in a man's world and did not flinch. To others, she was a scandal, a concubine turned queen, a woman who killed her husband to retain power, a symbol of arrogance in feminine form. But both views missed the point. Shajar al-Durr was not a symbol. She was a fact. She was power in the flesh. She was strategy written in eyeliner and armor. She was the living refutation of every law that said women must remain behind the veil, behind the throne, behind history. Even the caliphate's refusal to acknowledge her reign could not undo it. She had minted coins. She had been named in the khutbah. She had held council. She had signed edicts. In the language of medieval legitimacy, she had been, beyond dispute, a sovereign. After her death, the Mamluk Sultanate she helped birth rose from the ashes of the Ayyubids. The slave soldiers she once commanded would go on to rule Egypt for centuries, shaping Islamic history with sabers and dynastic coups. But none of their sultans, not Baybars, not Calawan, not even the towering Al-Nasir Muhammad, ever had to break through the wall she shattered. She had already done it. There's a small shrine in Cairo, said to be hers. No grand mausoleum, no gilded dome. Just a quiet tomb, low and shadowed, where the sun touches the stone for a few hours each day. And there, beneath layers of dust and time, lies the woman who became sultan. Not by birth, not by right, but by will. And in that will, steel-threaded, pearl-bound, she carved her name into the part of history that never entirely dies. The part that waits, just beneath the surface. For someone to ask again, as she once did, what if I rule? In the scorching heat of a northern Indian summer, beneath the shimmering weight of Mughal silk and the burden of imperial motherhood, Arjamand Banu Begum, known to history as Mumtaz Mahal, died in childbirth. It was her 14th labor in 19 years, and the court had grown almost numb to the cycle of life and loss that orbited the imperial harem. But this time it was different. This time, the emperor wept. Shah Jahan, ruler of the Mughal Empire and descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, did not simply mourn. He unraveled. For weeks, he vanished from court. He refused food, refused music, refused the consolations of his remaining wives. The empire, vast and sophisticated, continued to breathe. Barely, but at its center, the man who commanded its armies and artisans sat in silence, broken. From that grief would rise the most celebrated mausoleum the world has ever known. The Taj Mahal did not begin as a monument. It began as a question. How do you eternalize loss? How do you carve mourning into matter? The answer, in Shah Jahan's world, was marble. White marble, pure as sorrow, brought from distant quarries. Laid stone upon stone, whisper upon whisper, until architecture could pass for afterlife. But behind this gesture of love stood a vast engine of imperial power. The Mughal court was not a haven of romance. It was a furnace of conquest, taxes, tribute, and artistic control. The vision of the Taj Mahal could only be born in a world where labor was infinite, material wealth unchallenged, and the emperors will divine. Over 20,000 workers, stone cutters, inlayers, calligraphers, architects were summoned to Agra. For over 2 decades, they shaped not just a tomb, but a philosophy of death made manifest. The foundations were dug into the soft banks of the Yamuna River. The plinth alone was a feat of logistics. Thousands of elephants ferrying slabs of sandstone to elevate the tomb above the floodplain, as if the beloved must rise above not only time, but nature itself. And above it all, a dome like a tear suspended in air, flanked by minarets that did not call to prayer, but to memory. To the empire, this was devotion. To the treasury, it was burden. To the laborers, it was dust and exhaustion. But to Shah Jahan, it was the only thing that could silence the scream of grief. Mumtaz Mahal would never see it, but her death was written into every inch of it. And from that moment, the Taj Mahal ceased to be a tomb. It became a statement. That love, when armed with empire, could become architecture. Before marble can gleam, hands must bleed. And before domes rise, empires must kneel before ambition. The Taj Mahal, that jewel of grief encased in stone, was not the creation of a single moment of sorrow. It was the inevitable product of an empire built to immortalize power through spectacle. The Mughal Empire in the 17th century was one of the richest political entities on earth. It stretched from the Afghan passes in the northwest to the lush deltas of Bengal in the east, a patchwork of sultanates and kingdoms welded together by conquest, diplomacy, and fear. Shah Jahan did not inherit a dream. He inherited an apparatus. The Mughal court was machinery, intricate and unyielding, and its fuel was taxation, labor, and the ceaseless churn of artisanship. The construction of the Taj Mahal unfolded within this grand mechanism. Every slab of marble, every inlaid gemstone, every whisper of Arabic calligraphy was paid for not with romantic devotion alone, but with revenue gathered from farmers, merchants, and regional governors. The emperor's grief was genuine, but his means of expression were extracted from the lives of millions who had never seen the inside of a palace. Much of the skilled labor came from guilds, trained and highly respected. But the brute force, hauling, leveling, paving, was performed by men and boys drafted from villages across the subcontinent. They were not slaves in the technical sense, but their freedom was theoretical, bound by debt, caste, and imperial demand. They worked beneath a sun that made even marble burn to the touch. And then there were the women, the invisible half of the empire, veiled not only in cloth, but in record and recognition. The harem, which many imagine as a passive collection of silken shadows, was in fact a parallel world of politics and influence. Mumtaz Mahal herself had been no idle ornament. She advised her husband, managed petitions, and corresponded with provincial leaders. Her voice echoed in the corridors of imperial policy, even if history later trimmed it into silence. Other women, too, shaped the empire behind the veil. Wet nurses, courtly advisors, concubines with dynastic aspirations. Each played a role in the fragile balance that held the Mughal world together. And it was their absence, their erasure, that the Taj Mahal indirectly commemorated. A woman exalted in death, even as the living remained unrecorded. As the tomb rose, so did the burdens of the empire. Famines loomed. Wars flickered at the borders. But the project continued because empires cannot grieve like ordinary men. They must do so in stone, in spectacle, in proportions so vast they blot out the sky. So when you gaze upon the Taj Mahal, remember this. The emperor may have built it for one woman, but it was shaped by the hands, the sweat, and the silence of millions. It is not just a mausoleum. It is a map of power carved into the face of devotion. To imagine the Taj Mahal as the creation of a single man, Shah Jahan, grief-struck and imperious, is to misunderstand both architecture and empire. Great monuments are never the work of one vision. They are the chorus of many, orchestrated into stone. And though Shah Jahan may have commanded the tomb, it was a cadre of architects, mathematicians, engineers, and artisans who made mourning measurable, proportioned, and luminous. At the center of this collective was Ustad Ahmad Lahori, often cited by later sources as the chief architect. A man of Persian descent, trained in the traditions of Timur geometry and Mughal grandeur, Ahmad Lahori understood that beauty, true imperial beauty, was never arbitrary. It had to conform to logic, to balance, to that invisible arithmetic of form that made eyes widen and hearts quiet. But even he did not work alone. The Mughal court operated like a guild of minds. Specialists from across the empire were summoned. Calligraphers from Shiraz, inlayers from Bokhara, stonecutters from Rajasthan, dome builders from Samarkand. The project became a university without walls. Each master artisan entrusted with a sliver of eternity. They spoke different languages, came from different faiths, Hindus, Muslims, Central Asians, Persians, but their work harmonized into a single voice, the voice of form made holy. The Taj Mahal is not just Islamic architecture. It is Mughal cosmopolitanism sculpted to perfection. Domes from Persia, chhatris from India, pietra dura from Italy, all colliding into unity. No detail was left to accident. The central dome, flanked by 4 slender minarets, was engineered to appear weightless, suspended like a prayer above the tomb. The layout of the gardens followed the charbagh concept, a quadrilateral paradise divided by 4 flowing streams, drawn from Quranic descriptions of heaven. Even the symmetry was purposeful, so precise that a single inch's deviation in a marble filigree could bring reprimand or dismissal. And then there were the scripts. Amanat Khan, master calligrapher, inscribed verses of the Quran across the entryways and walls, each word chosen for resonance with death, paradise, and divine mercy. But he did something almost revolutionary. He signed his work. Beneath the soaring gateway, his name remains, small, humble, yet defiant. Written by the insignificant being Amanat Khan Shirazi. That signature matters. It is one of the few places on the monument where an individual voice endures. Most did not get that honor. No list survives of all the workers, the thousands of hands that chiseled and polished and lifted. Their stories dissolved into the marble, undocumented. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. A tomb built to remember one woman stands on the forgotten labor of multitudes. Yet their vision endures, because while the emperor grieved, it was they who made that grief beautiful. And in doing so, They became architects not only of stone, but of memory itself. To step into the garden of the Taj Mahal is to enter a riddle, crafted in symmetry, irrigated by precision, and haunted by paradise. This is no ordinary pleasure ground. It is a theological blueprint in stone and soil, designed not for the living, but for the dead, for those who dream of eternity and dare to shape it into squares. The Mughal Charbagh, a quadrilateral garden divided into 4 sections by water channels, was born from Persian models and Quranic descriptions of Jannah, the eternal garden promised to the faithful. Shah Jahan's designers did not merely mimic this vision. They tried to materialize it. At the Taj, the layout becomes a visual invocation of heaven, for rivers flowing from a central source, bounded by trees, flowering paths, and mirror-smooth pools that fracture and reflect the marble dome like a mirage. And yet, unlike the traditional Charbagh layout, where the tomb lies at the very center of the garden, the Taj Mahal breaks its own sacred geometry. The white marble mausoleum stands not in the heart of the quadrangle, but at its northern edge, overlooking the Yamuna River. This deviation is no accident. It is a gesture both aesthetic and esoteric, opening the tomb toward the river as if the soul it houses must gaze across the water into the unknown. But the symbolism does not end at geography. The trees were chosen for meaning. Cypress for mourning, fruit-bearing trees for rebirth. The fountains are not decorative. They are metaphor. Their stillness is orchestrated to reflect the tomb so clearly that one might question which is real, the building or its double in water. This, too, is deliberate. Illusion was part of the design. Reflection became resurrection. And then there is silence. Despite the throngs of visitors today, the original garden was built for quiet procession. It was not meant to be walked casually, but spiritually. It was a preparation chamber for the mind before approaching the tomb itself. Every footstep down the central axis narrowed one's perspective until only the mausoleum remained, rising, glowing, unignorable. The garden did not frame the tomb. It funneled you toward it, like grief itself. But even here, in this vision of paradise, power lingers. The garden was maintained by an army of gardeners and water bearers. Its perfection demanded constant labor. The water channels were feats of hydraulic engineering, fed by a network of aqueducts and underground tanks. Nothing about the garden was natural. It was cultivated control. Even paradise required planning. And so, when you walk through the garden of the Taj Mahal, you do not merely cross grass or admire flowers. You pass through an illusion carefully crafted to feel eternal. An illusion that speaks not only of love, but of the empire that made it bloom. At the center of the Taj Mahal, past the archways of shadow and the symmetry of dreams, lies a chamber that is both destination and deception. The inner sanctum, quiet, cool, resonant with hushed breath, is the axis upon which all the monument turns. And yet, what you see there is not what lies beneath. You enter not to gaze upon a tomb, but upon its echo. The cenotaphs of Mumtaz Mahal and Shah Jahan rise in the heart of the main chamber, their placement and design so precise that they appear weightless. Marble floating on marble, filigreed with precious inlay and enfolded by carved screens. They face each other, yet remain apart, a dialogue in death. The calligraphy on Mumtaz's cenotaph sings verses of divine mercy. On Shah Jahan's, added years later, a more somber tone. He traveled from this world to the banquet of eternity. But these are not the actual tombs. They are monuments within a monument, decoys in stone. The real sarcophagi lie in a crypt directly beneath, inaccessible to the public, sealed in darkness. This duality, this architecture of concealment, was intentional. The Mughals knew that meaning could be multiplied through mystery. What is seen is ceremonial. What is hidden is sacred. And the material of mourning was marble. Not just any marble, but Makrana marble from Rajasthan, luminous and soft to the touch, capable of reflecting moonlight like skin and carving like parchment. This stone was chosen not only for its purity, but for its personality. Under different skies, it shifts. Pink at dawn, gold at noon, silver at dusk, blue under stars. It mourns with the sky. Upon it, artisans inlaid pietra dura designs, flowers, vines, blossoms that never fade, using semi-precious stones imported from all across Asia. Jasper, jade, lapis lazuli, onyx, carnelian, turquoise. Each petal took weeks to craft. Each vine wound across the marble like time itself, curling, eternal, silent. Even the air was designed. The chamber was constructed to echo faintly, so that every footstep, every whispered prayer expands and returns like grief that cannot be contained. It is not a place of weeping, but of awe, and awe is mourning stretched until it breaks. Shah Jahan would eventually join Mumtaz in death, not as a planner, not as an emperor, but as her companion in stone. He died under house arrest, overthrown by his own son, and was buried beside her, not by his own will, but by the decree of another. Even in death, the tomb bears witness to the push and pull of devotion and dynasty. They lie together, yet his cenotaph disrupts the perfect symmetry of the chamber. That imperfection remains, is the only flaw in the entire structure, one made by history, not design. And perhaps that is the truest epitaph of all. For even the most perfect love, when shaped by empire, must carry a crack. Even marble has enemies. And in Shah Jahan's India, the greatest threat to beauty was not drought, nor war, nor time. It was ambition wearing a son's face. For as the Taj Mahal neared completion, the empire that built it began to crack beneath the weight of its own magnificence. The Mughal throne was never passed with ease. It was seized always through intrigue or war. Shah Jahan had claimed his crown through battle. He should have known that his own sons would do the same. Among them, for princely rivals stood poised, each one born of Mumtaz Mahal, each educated, brilliant, ruthless. But only one would prevail. Aurangzeb, the third son, quiet and austere, watched his brothers tear the empire apart in a war of succession that turned India's rivers red. Shah Jahan, aging and increasingly obsessed with his grief temple in Agra, found himself outmaneuvered, outnumbered, and eventually out of power. In 1658, Aurangzeb declared his father unfit to rule and imprisoned him in the Agra fort, within sight, but forever out of reach, of the Taj Mahal. There, in a chamber with a marble lattice window, Shah Jahan spent his final years gazing at the tomb of his beloved. His empire had become his prison, his sons his judges, and the monument he had raised to love now stood as a mirror of loss, of dynasty fractured, of loyalty undone. Aurangzeb, unlike his father, had no taste for architectural splendor. A devout and often severe ruler, he viewed the Taj Mahal as an extravagance bordering on sin. The marble gardens, the jeweled domes, the endless fountains, all seemed to him symptoms of a decaying court. He slashed imperial spending, curtailed artistic patronage, and shifted the empire from aesthetics to orthodoxy. Under his long and iron reign, the Mughal Empire expanded militarily, but its cultural zenith dimmed. The empire grew outward, but hollowed inward. No more Taj Mahals would rise. No more love letters in stone. In its place, control, conformity, conquest. Yet even Aurangzeb could not bring himself to destroy the Taj. He left it standing, perhaps recognizing that some ghosts are best left undisturbed. The tomb, though unloved, endured, but its builders, its caretakers, its gardens all began to fade. Budgets dried up, marble cracked, dust crept in where tribute once flowed. And Shah Jahan, once the emperor of a world-defining civilization, died not on a throne, but in captivity. They say his body was carried across the river and laid beside Mumtaz in the crypt, just as he had always wished. But wishes are fragile in the hands of empires, and the Taj Mahal, though it glittered in moonlight, now belonged to a dynasty no longer in love with beauty. By the time British boots echoed through the halls of Agra, the Taj Mahal was no longer a symbol of imperial might. It was a relic. The Mughal Empire had withered, divided, and conquered by internal decline and foreign ambition. And as the East India Company tightened its grip on India, it came not only for its spices and soldiers, but for its stories. And few stories gleamed brighter, or more tragically, than the tomb by the river. When the British first laid eyes on the Taj Mahal in the late 18th century, it was a monument in decline. The fountains were dry, the gardens choked with weeds. Gemstones had long been pried from the inlay. Local governors had stripped the walls for ornament and profit. Bats hung from domes that once echoed with Quranic verses. It was not heaven, it was ruin. But the British, ever keen to claim grandeur, saw potential. They did not see it as a Muslim mausoleum. They saw it as an artifact, a trophy, a jewel of the Orient to be cataloged and possessed. Painters arrived first, documenting the tomb in watercolors, its silhouette framed by sunset and exoticism. Then came surveyors, poets, officers, and soon tourists. The Taj Mahal entered a new chapter, not as a shrine of mourning, but as a backdrop for empire. In the 19th century, under Lord Curzon, British Viceroy of India, the Taj was restored. Marble was scrubbed, lawns trimmed, fountains reinstalled. The wild Charbagh garden, once symbolic of paradise, was recast in European symmetry, made to resemble an English country estate. It was sanitized, anglicized, curated. In their quest to preserve, the colonizers reauthored. And so, the Taj Mahal, built to reflect a deeply personal, cultural, and spiritual grief, was converted into a colonial pageant. Visiting dignitaries posed before it. British brides honeymooned in its shadow. Souvenirs were printed, guidebooks written. The tomb became a product. And yet, the irony never left its stone. For every foreigner who stood in awe beneath its dome, there was a local who remembered what it used to mean. For every restoration, a distortion. And though the British claimed to be its saviors, their presence was a whisper of theft. They had not built the Taj, but they made it theirs. In the cracks of the marble, in the silence of the crypt, the tomb remembered otherwise. The British would eventually leave. But by then, the Taj Mahal was not just an Indian monument. It had become an imperial mirror, showing every empire, past or present, exactly what it wished to see. When India awoke as a sovereign republic in 1947, freed from colonial chains, yet scarred by partition, it inherited not only independence, but a pantheon of contradictions. And among them stood the Taj Mahal, majestic, ambiguous, and waiting to be reclaimed. To some, it was an Islamic monument, raised by a Muslim emperor for his Persian queen, etched with Quranic verses, steeped in Mughal legacy. To others, it was Indian, a creation of local artisans, crafted in Indian soil, representing the subcontinent's architectural genius. And to a newly formed nation still bleeding from the wounds of communal division, this tension was not architectural, it was political. The Taj Mahal had survived invaders, iconoclasts, looters, and curators. But now it faced something more subtle: reinterpretation. In the decades following independence, the monument became a canvas for competing narratives. Secular leaders hailed it as a national treasure, proof that India's past was plural, layered, indivisible. The government placed it on currency, postage, and tourist posters. The Taj was not merely a tomb. It was a symbol of continuity, of unity amidst difference. But others saw in it a mark of foreign rule. Critics argued that glorifying Mughal monuments was an embrace of imperial history. Debates flared. Was the Taj Indian or Islamic? Was it a love story or a symbol of subjugation? These questions, once academic, became urgent in the corridors of politics and identity. Meanwhile, millions came, pilgrims of awe, tourists with cameras, newlyweds in rented sherwanis. The monument absorbed them all. Its whiteness reflected every gaze. It became the backdrop of music videos, of wedding albums, of nationalist speeches, and Bollywood dreams. It remained silent through it all, letting others narrate its meaning. The Archaeological Survey of India maintained it. Conservationists fought pollution and acid rain. The Yamuna receded and swelled. The marble yellowed, slowly, under the weight of time and diesel. Yet still the dome rose. Still the minarets stood. And every night, the moon poured its silver over the stone like memory returning to a sleepless mind. In a fractured world, the Taj became a rare consensus. Whatever else it was, Muslim, Indian, imperial, romantic, it was ours. A monument no longer just to love, or loss, or empire, but to endurance. To look upon the Taj Mahal is to stand before silence dressed in splendor. It does not explain itself. It does not argue. It simply is, and in its stillness, it asks a question that cannot be answered in words. What does beauty mean when built on impermanence? The Taj Mahal is not eternal. It weathers. Its marble, once luminous as dawn, now carries faint stains from breath, from smoke, from time. Its minarets lean by imperceptible degrees. Its gardens thirst for a river that no longer flows as it once did. And yet, the image of perfection persists, not because the monument remains unchanged, but because we keep returning to it with the same longing. A longing for permanence in a world of loss. It is a paradox, a tomb that lives, a love that died, an empire that fell, a memory that refuses to vanish. People come for many reasons. Some come for the love story, simplified, idealized, endlessly retold. Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, the emperor and his queen, reunited in death, enshrined in stone. Others come for the architecture, for the mathematical grace of its symmetry, the illusion of weightlessness, the dizzying precision of its ornamentation. Some come for beauty, for photos, for romance, for history. And some come for none of these. They come because the Taj has become more than itself. It is a screen onto which meaning is projected, a surface so polished that it reflects whatever one brings to it. Love, loss, pride, resistance. It is monument as mirror. You do not only see it, you see yourself in it. And perhaps that was always the intent. For what is grief, if not the most personal of mirrors? What is memory, if not a palace we construct from things already gone? The Taj Mahal began as a singular sorrow. It became a national symbol, a colonial curiosity, a global wonder. But above all, it remains a place of stillness in a world of noise, a place that asks, without words, what will you build when you lose what you love? In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world has not yet awakened and the sky turns from black to ash, the Taj Mahal breathes. Not in the way that cities do, not with motion or noise, but with presence. It waits, as it has waited for centuries, not for kings or pilgrims, not for lovers or leaders, but simply for light. And when the first sun touches its dome, it glows. Not for history, not for empire, not even for love, but because stone, when carved with intention and burdened with memory, remembers how to shine. Empires have come and gone. Flags have changed. Names have faded. The Yamuna has thinned. The marble has cracked. But the question lingers in the air like incense. If grief can build this, what else might we build from love? And so the Taj Mahal stands, not as proof of one man's sorrow, but as a monument to the imagination of mourning. It is not eternal, but it is enough.